This is a world in which every creature must prove its existence only through the force. This is an incredible world with unusual architecture and various mythical creatures. One of the yokai got very angry. He bared his teeth and blood was running down his face, and he himself looked like a tiger man. He was jumping from one rock to another and trying to get away from someone. This creature was very fast and agile. At some point it stopped and decided to look back. This tiger man said that he would not allow his enemy to proclaim himself the ruler of the mountain people's kingdom. Suddenly the same yokai appeared in front of him, about whom our story will be about. The same creature that had no equal here. He hit the tiger man and broke the stone. The tiger fell to the ground, and on its back, a block of different stones began to crumble and crack. He screamed in pain. His blood began to stain his face. He couldn't resist this creature. The guy defeated the tiger, and in a sign of victory, put his foot on its back to show his dominance over it. He looked at his opponent lying on the ground and said that the tiger had boasted a lot when he challenged him to a fight, and now he, like a true coward, tried to escape. The fox said that he managed to defeat the tiger for the third time, and that means that he is a totally lead supposed winner and has no equal. The fox stepped on his face and warned the tiger that he and his friends would never show their prey to foxes again. The fox said that his opponent ignored all his warnings and still entered the fight, so he doesn't know whether to spare the tiger or not. But his opponent at that moment began to feel strong anger and aggression, and his eyes began to glow red. He changed his shape and transformed from a man into a raw tiger. His size became twice as big, and he became much stronger. The fox looked like a puppy in comparison. The fox at that moment started laughing and said that when a tiger enlarges its body, it doesn't get stronger. It just gets bigger and has more meat inside it, but that doesn't mean it can win. He hit the tiger right in the face with his fist, and his blow had an incredible force of energy that caused great damage. The tiger's body couldn't withstand such damage, and he felt incredible pain, and a huge hole appeared in the blood of his body. Began to flow from this tiger's body, and there was so much that the bloody area began, but the fox just stood still and watched its opponent die. This guy wasn't as simple as he might seem at first glance. He was the head of the yokai fox and was the king of their kingdom. But this guy didn't really want to become king. He dreamed of completely different things. But it so happened that one day he was able to defeat a very strong dragon monster that had been chasing foxes for 500 years. And after she defeated this monster, the foxes chose him as their king, but the guy was too tired and just wanted to sleep. He liked the fact that after he became the king of the foxes, they began to constantly bother him with various questions and requests that he didn't want to resolve. One day a man came up to him and demanded something of him, but the fox asked the man who he was. The man replied that he was a follower of the Dharma and a monk of the human kingdom. This man was very unhappy because the yokai foxes had done a lot of damage to people and caused great harm to humanity, and he was very angry with the foxes. Our main character's assistant reported that this strange old man had defeated up to 12 foxes using his strange gestures, which he calls martial arts. The king asked what martial arts are. At that time, there was no border between the yokai kingdom and humans, so yokai often didn't visit people and caused problems for them. The king was very tired of the constant problems in the kingdom and didn't want to solve another problem with this monk, so he allowed him to find the fox that was creating problems for him and do whatever he wanted with it. Nak heard the Fox King's reply and decided to listen to his words. He activated his combat skill and realized that the main fox causing him problems was the king. The fox understood at that moment that you couldn't just run away from this old man, and you'd still have to fight him. The monk hit the ground with his staff and wanted to kill the fox with one blow, but missed because the fox managed to jump away in time. The king realized that this man's physical strength and speed are not inferior to those of yokai, and he is just as capable a warrior as they are. The monk began to strike very quickly with his palms and constantly controlled his breathing. At this point, the king assumed that his movement was called martial arts, but the king managed to fight them off easily, blocking them with his tails. He looked at his ass and noticed that after these attacks, he had lost a lot of hair from his ass. He understood that in the human world, this monk was probably a very strong warrior, but to the fox he was nothing more than an ant playing on his leg. The fox threw the enemy far away with a wave of his hand, and he did it with such ease that the monk didn't even have time to understand. This man fell to the ground and sat down by a tree. He was coming back to his senses after such a strong attack, and the king couldn't understand how you can hit someone and not kill them afterwards. His assistant approached the monk and saw that he was unconscious, and then asked the king what to do with this man. The king replied that there's no point in killing an insect that crawls under your feet. After all, it doesn't interfere much, but sometimes it can just annoy you. That's how the king spared this monk and sent him to the kingdom of the people, saving this man's life. But this man apparently went mad, because after 15 days he came back and once again gave the laboratory to the king of the yokai. This time he wasn't alone and brought along a comrade called Jan, who saying his comrade also made strange movements that were probably martial arts and tried to attack the king using the energy of Yin and Yang. The Fox King fought these two lunatics using only his 9 tails. He didn't even move during the fight. The king was thinking throughout the battle that if he let these people leave here alive again, they would come back and drag even more people here, and that can't be allowed. He used his tail to wrap around the monk's neck and strangle him. She started choking two opponents at the same time, and that's the only way to end this disgrace. He didn't want to kill these two people, but it was the only way to stop him and make sure they didn't bother him anymore. After he killed them, he said that these guys should have retreated when they saw the strength of their opponent, but their choice was to fight, so they died in battle. He looked at the 2 corpses lying there, and then decided to leave and left the dead here. When he was leaving here, he suddenly heard a woman's voice shouting that someone had killed his older brother. He turned his head and decided to look closely at the woman who had just said that her dead brother was lying here. The girl sat down next to her dead older brother's body and cried. She said that now she would have to survive on her own and didn't understand how she would do it. Ray, all my life I've thought of myself as a cold-blooded yokai who doesn't feel sorry for his opponents, let alone the creatures of the human race, but when he saw a woman crying, something changed inside him. He began to experience strange sensations that had previously been inaccessible to him. He didn't understand why he now felt so unpleasant and felt guilty for his action. Her tears looked like chicken droppings, but even so they didn't evoke any negative emotions in him, and in the King of the Foxes, it was disturbing. He felt very sorry for this girl, and for some reason, he wanted to feel sorry for her, but at the same time he understood that he was not to blame for anything, because these guys came here, and nobody forced them to fight. She sat in the cemetery alone, and crows flew across the sky and looked at her as if she were prey that would soon die too. The fox was very interested in this girl and decided to take care of her, and it's been a week since her brother died, but she hasn't had a drink of water in all that time. He asked his partner if he could find out why this girl hadn't returned to the human world for a whole week. His assistant replied that he was talking to rats, and they told him that the girl's whole life depended on her brother, and that he had many enemies during his life. The king began to understand the essence of the problem and felt an enormous weight of responsibility for this girl. Because of his action, she is now suffering. He knew that if this girl returned to the human world, she would die because her brother's enemies would simply kill her, and she wouldn't be able to defend herself. The king's assistant said that it's also dangerous for this girl to remain in the yokai world, and she won't be able to survive here. The king said that this girl will starve to death faster than the hungry yokai can get to her. She sat in the same place for a week and didn't move. All she could do was cry, and suddenly the girl heard someone approaching her and turned her head away. A plate of human food was placed in front of her. It was very tasty and smelled good. It had been prepared especially for this girl. The king put this food out for her and said that she needed to eat well and live happily so that her older brother's soul could calm down and move on to another world. She didn't understand how I reacted to this fox because he was her brother's murderer, but at the same time I wasn't indifferent to her fate. He thought that if this woman was going to suffer wherever she went, why didn't she just stay here by the king's side and live with him for the rest of her life? Fortunately, this girl was very smart. She understood the fox's intention and the circumstances in which her life now finds itself, so she accepted and agreed. Without hesitation, she agreed to stay in the yokai world and accepted the Fox King's offer, and now tried to create a new life for herself here. Day after day she got used to the new world and tried to adapt quickly to the strict laws and rules of yokai, but as difficult as it was here, she began to smile and live a full life. The king felt helpless next to her because he fell in love with her beautiful face and couldn't help himself. She was the best creature he had ever met on his path. Even looking at her from afar, he felt a peace he had never experienced in all his long life as a yokai. But suddenly everything changed, and the king lost all his peace and harmony, and everything he loved suddenly disappeared. This girl was hung from a pole and killed. She died a terrible death and was tortured before she died. Sharp spears and thorns were coming out of his body. His blood dripped down the pillar, and when the king saw this, he was furious and ready to destroy everyone who did this. The black fox fell to his knees in front of the king and began to cry. He said he had committed a terrible sin. The black fox told the king that he had allowed scoundrels into his territory who had come to pay homage to the king and brought happiness to the young woman. The king stood near the girl's corpse and looked at her. He still couldn't believe she was dead. Her body was mutilated and her natural beauty was ruined by the bandits who killed her. Anger filled the Fox King's body and mind, and he wanted to take revenge on the people who had done this to the girl he loved. The king found a rat that had killed his beloved, and the rat replied that it had only done so because it had been ordered to do so by its master. The fox could no longer stop tormenting the mouse and mutilating its body. He wanted to make this creature suffer. The king was looking for all those involved in the murder of his beloved and found a scoundrel who knew about it, but did nothing. It was the Timberwolf who helped the murderers find the girl. The king caught up with this wolf, otherwise it would break his bones and make him suffer, but he killed it nonetheless. He went to a large pig, who was also involved in the murder of his beloved girl, but the pig said that the fox shouldn't protect a human girl, and that's against yokai rules. The white fox didn't want to hear anything from this scoundrel, and gave him the strongest blow with which he destroyed a large pig and deprived it of its head. The white fox killed a large number of creatures. He killed everyone who was involved in the death of his beloved girl. In the end, his revenge grew large, and the magical forest was filled with corpses. Even those who were close to the king were still killed. No one was able to escape his wrath. He took revenge on everyone he considered guilty of it. Their blood did not spread throughout the yokai kingdom, and did not have time to dry up for a moment, because the king could not quench his thirst for revenge, and the emptiness in him forced him to commit murder. He already thought that he would start to feel better when he killed all these creatures, but his pain didn't disappear anywhere, and the void got even bigger. His heart was still full of indignation, and was still beating furiously, and he wanted to restore the harmony that had existed before. But he understood that it was impossible to give anything back, and this made him sick. He was tired of a life like this. A bright white light appeared in the pool of blood and flew into the air. The white fox turned its attention to this bright light and tried to look closer to understand. What was an incredible phenomenon among the darkness, and hundreds of corpses, a pure white immaculate light appeared from the bloody pool. He looked closer and saw that it was a flower bud that had suddenly appeared out of nowhere, sprouting from a pool of blood from fallen yokai. This bud opened into a real flower that grew from a pool of blood, and the bloody rain couldn't stain its petals. The white fox was surprised to see a lotus here in a pool of blood. He didn't understand where this flower came from. But over time he realized that this was a childish trick that only heavenly creatures are capable of. They say that you are the same immortal Neza. White fox, I told my flower that if he came here to stop the king from carrying out his bloody retribution, then the flower is already too late, and the king doesn't want to see any more bloodshed. He asked that this flower disappear and not show itself to him again, or if it doesn't disappear, the king will pick it and destroy it. The lotus at that moment began to shine with a brilliant light and tap into an incredible energy. This energy blinded the white fox, and he had never seen anything like it. It was something new and incredible for him. He began to lose control of his body and realized that the white light was taking him to another space, and he couldn't resist. When the light disappeared, the white fox saw something very unusual and was surprised that its eyes were so wide open that you could see its navy blue pupils. At that moment, when he fell into despair and lost the will to live, feeling sorry for him, something unexpected came to his aid. This creature helps all living beings in this world not to go astray and guides them on the true path so that they can live again and do the right things, was the Taga. God asked the white fox if he would like to renounce his identity forever and stop being a yokai, but in exchange for that he could become an ordinary person. The white fox asked God in surprise what this meant and thought about this proposal, because being human is much worse than being a fox. His first thought was that this was completely stupid, and turning into a human would be the stupidest decision he could make. However, after reflection, he realized that he could avoid the boring life of a yokai and couldn't find a single reason to refuse. He was ready to commit suicide, so turning into a human could be a good decision. The white fox made up his mind and turned to God with a request to turn him into a man. Of course, it wasn't for nothing, and in 1,000 years he'll have to atone for his sins and do good deeds. He was very surprised when God asked him to do good deeds and all sorts of nonsense for 1,000 years that never brought him pleasure. But the white fox even here agreed and accepted God's conditions. He said he would do good deeds to atone for his sins. For an immortal yokai, a person's life and 1,000 years of good deeds seemed like a very short period of time. But after a year of good deeds, not everything seemed as simple as he first thought. 1,000 years of good deeds turned into an incredibly long time for him, and he counted all the years you were waiting for when it would all be over. The idea of giving up has often occurred to him. It's normal to exchange the 1,000-year life of a great yokai creature for a human life that doesn't even last hundreds of years. He constantly thought about his agreement with the great deity, who was the source of his pride, and fortunately he was able to withstand all the difficulties and thoughts that came his way. The Tiga again called the white fox to him and praised him for the time of repentance he had spent in the human world, and said that the fox had done many good deeds. He replied that he was grateful to the deity for preventing the yokai from attacking people, and that this was the most valuable merit because it benefited the entire human world. Taga held out his hand to the guy and said that now he had to live the life of a man, and asked him to give him everything that the fox would no longer need. He agreed to give the deity what he asked for, despite the fact that it was difficult for him to part with it. He began to collect his blue energy from his stomach and withdraw it. Then he began to extract the energy from his chest and also to give it to the deity. He tried to lift this sphere of energy and remove it from his body. He opened his mouth to me, and through it managed to extract the great energy from his body. This sphere of energy is called the fox bead. This is his source of power, which he has been perfecting for thousands of years. He was sad to have to donate this account because he had worked for many years to improve it. God asked the white fox if it would regret its decision in the future, and if it would like to change anything. He proudly put his hands on his belt and asked God if he looked like someone who would regret his actions. God said that the white fox chooses the great chariot through which he will strive to achieve awakening for the benefit of all sentient beings. The white fox felt his body evaporating and he felt reborn. Yokai's life was constantly pressing down on him from different sides, but now, after throwing it away, he felt lightness and happiness in the human world. His soul was in a pink petal that sought the human city to find its new body. Petal tried to find a decent body for the new owner, and so was in no hurry. He flew through the city, and right on the edge of town, he found a large building that looked like a palace. Through an open window in this building, a petal entered the room and flew to a boy who was lying in bed asleep. He was already very close to this boy and would soon have to get in touch with him. The petal has chosen the most suitable body for the new soul that will settle in this body. He touched the edge of the paper to this boy's blue one, and magic happened in the room. Thanks to the great God, he has now become a man and will live like a man in this world. His story has just begun, and the white fox has opened his eyes for the first time while in a human body, and is now starting a new life. From the house came the voice of a nanny going to the young master's room. She said that the young master had barely reached puberty and was still alive. She climbed the stairs and went to his room on the second floor. She thought that she had already tried many expensive drugs and procedures, and none of them had worked. The babysitter suggested that the heavens had turned their backs on them, and that the young master would never be able to live a normal life again. But when she entered his room, what she saw shocked her, and she didn't understand how she needed to react to it. The young master was sitting on his bed in complete darkness. He looked very worried and dangerous. His behavior was unusual for a boy, and the nanny was so scared that she dropped the bowl of water on the floor. He sat on the bed with a dissatisfied expression on his face and looked very bad. The nanny immediately ran to her parents to tell them what had happened. The father was very shocked to hear that his son Yunho has woken up and is feeling healthy. Puzzle told the gentleman that the nanny was so surprised that she paled and couldn't speak normally, but ordered the program to urgently inform the gentleman about it. The father began to weep with joy and abandoned all his business. He said he needed to get home quickly and see for himself. The window of the young master's bedroom illuminated the space of the living room. He was tired of the bed and realized that he had a lot of difficulty moving, and his legs were as if they had forgotten how to walk properly. The guy didn't understand what was going on. He just thought he heard a woman screaming in the next room. He saw a mirror in his room and decided to approach it to see his reflection. When he looked in the mirror, what he saw there surprised him, and he didn't understand how to react. He was frightened when he saw his new appearance in the reflection. He looked like a teenager and didn't understand what had happened to him. It was unusual for him to be in such a body, and he began to scream with fear. His waxen scream was heard throughout the house. He screamed so loudly that people's ears were blocked, and he asked why he was like that. He thought that when he was transferred to a new body, he would be a child or a baby, but for some reason he looked like a teenager and didn't understand how that happened. His head began to ache a lot, and he felt that memories of a past life were pressing down on his head. He remembered everything that had happened to him in this body before he moved into it, and all these memories made his head hurt a lot. He couldn't understand what kind of images were flashing before his eyes. New memories were constantly appearing in his head, and he didn't know what to do with them. When the last memories loaded into his head, he realized that these were the memories of the owner of this body, and he felt a little better. He was in the body of the eldest son of the lord of a huge business alliance called the Supreme Coalition, and his name was Yunho. His name was exactly the same as in his previous life. He was very weak physically and mentally, so a year ago, when his mother died, he was so shocked that he stopped eating and drinking, and after the incident, he developed a chronic illness and eventually died. Yunho couldn't believe that all this had happened to him. It seemed like a nightmare that he still had to get used to. He was disappointed because in his previous life, he was the king of the Yukai world, and now he was put into the body of a weak coward who lived a worthless life. He began to blame God for arming him and moving him into this terrible body, but he was counting on a different outcome. Yunho fell to the ground, and his head began to feel very dizzy. He couldn't keep his balance, and he felt very ill. He sat on the floor and thought that if he wanted to die, it would be better for him to die than to be tested on a new body. But he realized that in this situation, he could only blame himself. He needed to foresee this and present God with conditions that would exclude such situations. Taga asked the guy before moving him to a new body if he would regret his decision in the future, and the guy himself answered that question. He started to get even angrier with himself because he took responsibility for his decision, and there was no point in blaming God for it. He needed to calm down and accept the fact that he was now the owner of this new body and needed to deal with it and get used to it. He began to look for a solution to the problem and realized that he could strengthen this body using natural energy. The most remarkable thing about natural energy is that it can turn a weakling into a warrior and make him even stronger. He stood up and looked in the mirror again. His reflection still looked completely different from how he imagined himself. Yunho felt that his stomach hurt a lot, and he urgently needed to eat something before he could start improving his body. He opened a drawer in his desk and tried to find at least some food there. At that moment, his father ran into his room and called Yunho in a cheerful voice. He couldn't believe his eyes because his son was now walking calmly around the room. He couldn't hold back his tears and shouted that this brat could still get out of bed if you were standing up, and his father was filled with joy. He took the boy by the hand and asked what had happened to him and if anything had hurt him or if he was feeling all right. The father wanted to know everything that was happening to him now. Yunho was startled by his father's behavior. He still hadn't got used to the fact that this man was an important person to him. A memory popped into his head where he and his father are walking beside him, and his father tells him that he always has to keep going even if it seems like it's too late. Yunho looked at this man in surprise and called him father. He would be delighted if his memories mixed with this boy's memories and he perceived them as his own. The father was very happy that the boy recognized him and said that he is the lord of this place. His name is Hainu. His tears flowed his cheeks, and he tried to look at his son. He tried to touch his hair and feel his face alive because everyone thought the boy was already dying. The father sensed that his son was now very hungry and ordered the nanny to quickly bring some food to feed the boy. The nanny replied that she would do it as soon as possible. Life began at home. Everyone was busy with their own affairs and trying to help the young lord feel comfortable as quickly as possible. As promised, the babysitter prepared the food very quickly and tried to make it very tasty so that the boy would enjoy eating it. The father told his son that he could start eating, but asked him not to rush and to eat slowly so as not to burn himself with the hot soup. The guy was surprised to see human food in front of him. He forgot that in this body, he would have to eat exactly that food and everything that people cook. When he was a yukai, he tried human food several times out of curiosity, but the taste was disgustingly bitter and caused him to savagely reject their food. He put rice on his spoon and thought he didn't want to eat it, but as he was already a man, He had to get used to this food and understand its taste. He put the spoon in his mouth and tasted the food and tried to feel and understand how good it was. When the taste of this rice soup that his nanny had prepared for him began to be felt on his taste buds, he experienced incredible sensations. The father saw his son's dissatisfied face and asked what happened. He thought the boy felt bad again. Yoonho remained silent for a few seconds and chewed the food, then swallowed it and asked everyone present what it was. The nanny was startled to see the youngster's reaction. "Master," she said, "it was rice cooked over low heat with chopped vegetables and meat." The nanny said that she prepared this dish because she knows that the young master likes it and didn't even add any spices to it. But the boy surprised everyone when he heard the name of the dish. He smiled and said that everything was incredibly tasty. He quickly finished all the soup on his plate and immediately ordered another portion, which he liked so much that he couldn't stop himself. Yoonho hadn't even imagined that human food could be so tasty. He understands that this is a great advantage in the human world, and he likes the food here. He stopped being upset because he was transferred into a human body, and this world started not to seem such a bad place to him. His father raised his glass and said that today was the happiest day of his life because his son had woken up. He gathered many people at his home in honor of this holiday and said that he wanted to share this toast with everyone who lives on this earth with him. The whole town came to congratulate the Lord on the fact that his son had woken up, and a big party and a great holiday for everyone began in this town. But one person in this town hasn't been to the holiday yet and has decided not to congratulate the Lord on it. This man was sitting in the dark in his gazebo reading a book. The stranger was unhappy that the city was noisy, so she asked the maid what happened. The maid smiled and told her mistress that the young master had woken up. The girl was so shocked and surprised by the news that she threw the book on the floor and jumped out of her chair. He asked the maid if her brother had really woken up after such a long sleep. Yoonho started running in the morning to renew his body and improve it. Those morning runs were difficult for him, and he had to make an effort because it was impossible to live in a body like that. He couldn't run very far because he got tired very quickly, and that made him angry. After all, he didn't have these problems in the previous case. He stopped near the entrance to the castle and decided to catch his breath. He was very tired during the time he was running. It was unusual for him to be in a human body at night. He didn't understand what the problem was and why his strength was running out so quickly. He was constantly watched by the workers of this palace, who signed books and wrote chronicles in them. They were very surprised that this guy was running around the courtyard again. They didn't understand where he got so much energy and will to improve. The clerk was very surprised as the boy had been running for 10 days straight, and the young master felt strange when he woke up as if something had gotten into him. The second man replied that in the palace the servants say that this boy always does this before sitting on the bench, and thoughtfully he always runs in the yard. The third man in the room said that the boy was apparently sitting on a bench and was thinking about something very important, but this caused the rest of the men to laugh. The second man said that other children could memorize 1,000 classic characters in just a month, so it took the guy more than a year. They assumed that this guy apparently has some very important goal he's striving for, although outwardly he seems very silent and his intentions are unclear. A grown man came into the room and heard all the talk from these guys. He said that these people blamed the young gentleman for coming, and they were very scared after that sentence. An old man entered his room. He looked like a lord and was busy with the internal affairs of the palace. He said you can't discuss the young gentleman behind his back. At least he asked these men to watch their language when discussing the people who pay them. They began to feel guilty and didn't know how to apologize to the vice lord, and by their vitamins of guilt, they said a lot of unnecessary things. The gentleman left the room and decided to see what was happening on the street now and followed the boy. He observed this guy constantly running around the courtyard surrounding the palace. He was pleased to think that this boy didn't give up and was constantly overcoming obstacles and striving to improve. Yoonho finished his run and decided to start the next exercises. He raised his hand. Yoonho series for high ground, also known as meditating in the lotus position. He tried to control his breathing. She thought there that even after 2 weeks of absorbing natural energy, he wouldn't be able to collect almost a single drop in that damned body. He assumed that all this happened because the energy flow was contaminated with human impurities and now prevents him from improving this body. He was upset because he realized that he was doing useless things that didn't bring any results. Yoonho approached the palace gates and was met there by guards who said that the Lord had ordered them not to let the young master leave the courtyard until he had recovered, but the guy replied that he was fine. They told him that they still couldn't free him, and he thought that if he were now in the body of a fox he would kill them immediately. Yoonho couldn't improve his body and internal energy, but he still felt a weak flow inside him. He said he had no choice but to focus more on this flow and try to strengthen it. Yoonho closed his eyes and tried to focus all his attention on meditation and improving the internal flow of energy. But suddenly he felt a strange energy next to him and realized that he wasn't alone here, so he decided to open his eyes. A girl stood in front of him. It was his younger sister, and she asked her older brother what he was doing now. Yoonho wasn't prepared for the fact that this girl was interfering with him and distracting his attention. He recalled that his father didn't tell his sister what had happened because he was afraid she would upset him. And her sister was very sensitive to her older brother's illness and was happy to hear that he was doing well. He remembered that his younger sister's name is Somi. Homie younger sister, who loves him. When he woke up, she burst into his arms and cried a lot. Since then, the girl always comes to visit her brother when she has time. Is also one of the reasons that prevents a guy from absorbing natural energy and developing. Somi took a packet of fruit and invited his brother to eat together. Yoonho hadn't tasted the people's food yet, so he was interested to know what it was, and the girl replied that it was sweets that the servant had brought from the market. Yoonho thought that this girl wouldn't be able to win his trust just because she brings him lots of tasty things like these sweets. But when he tasted this delicious sweet, he didn't stop and asked for more. He said it was incredibly tasty, and his sister was very happy that he liked it. She said that her brother really changed a lot after he woke up, and he's acting very strangely now. Somi said that her brother didn't like sweets before, and he always said they were too sugary and impossible to eat. Yoonho told the girl that from now on she would learn many new things about him. Yoonho understood that he only looks like her on the outside, but in reality he is a completely different creature and is not her brother. Somi smiled and said that she absolutely doesn't care that her brother has changed and she loves him regardless of his habits. The sister asked the guy not to get sick anymore and to stay well because she doesn't want to worrying about him again. Yoonho replied that he would try not to get sick anymore and would do everything he could to be with her all the time. Night came, and there were many clouds in the sky, and they floated across the sky like ships on a giant ocean. Birds fly to the palace where the guy lived, gathering in a small flock. This was the guy's favorite part of the day because the servants brought him lots of different delicious foods, and he loved trying them all. Every evening he admired what was brought to him, a magnificent dinner uniting land, sea, and air. Here, there were products that could be collected from everywhere. He says that if the brutal yokai saw such a table, they would cry bloody tears of envy, but he didn't care much because he was a man and had the money to eat all that food. He said he would eat all that food to the last plate and do it in memory of all those victims. Somi smiled and was happy every time he saw his older brother smiling and acting like a normal, healthy person. The father went to the children and sat down at the table with them and said that the two of them had arrived very early, but the sister replied that they were in no hurry for dinner. The father said that if they were so hungry that they arrived early for dinner, then they could start eating right away. Yoonho was so hungry that he tried to stuff a whole fish in his mouth, didn't understand how to eat it properly, and tried to stuff the whole thing inside himself. Yoonho thought that eating like an ordinary person was a special pleasure because when he was a yokai, he couldn't eat for 1,000 years. Somi watched her brother and tried to stop him. She didn't understand the best way to explain to him that he shouldn't behave like that at the table. But the father stopped the daughter and said it's okay and let the guy eat as he wants because he needs to recover. Night fell and stars appeared in the sky and shone brightly. The father was sitting with his son on the veranda in the evening and drinking tea. He noticed that his son had become much stronger over the last few days. Yoonho replied that there is still a long road to recovery, but for now this result is more than enough. The father looked at his son and felt incredible joy because everything was fine with him now and his illness was over. He told his son that he can behave very arrogantly, but he still wants to ask what the guy is going to do with his studies because he skipped school for a whole year. He asked the boy if he wanted to go back to the academy and continue his studies. Yoonho didn't understand what his father was talking about now and which academy he was trying to tell him about because it all seemed so strange and incomprehensible to him. At that moment, the father said that on the other hand, he wants the boy to live the way he wants and doesn't force him to go there now, but when it gets easier for the boy it would be nice if you went there. You asked here where the academy is, and if it extends beyond the courtyard of this palace. Father Yu was very surprised by this question and replied to his son that this academy is located in a completely different place and is outside the palace. Yunho smiled when he heard that this academy was located in a different place. It was a good chance to get out of here and explore the rest of the world. Yunho replied that she was going to the gym tomorrow and wanted to get there as quickly as possible. Yunho said that he wants to go to this academy as soon as possible and will be happy to leave the palace. He was very happy with his son's decisions and said that the boy had grown up like his father in his heart and that he understood that his father's will remain the same. Yunho calmed down and felt his victory because he had been thinking for a whole week about how to get out of this palace, and now everything was even better than he could have imagined. He was still very inexperienced in the human world and mistakenly thought that tea could be drunk straight to the bottom. But it was his mistake, and he immediately spat out the hot tea, and the father tried to stop the boy and explained to him that he shouldn't do that. Divine prophecy says that the contribution of Confucius and MSU is enormous, but throughout your life you discover these postulates for yourself. Yunho stood near the palace gates with his father, and his father sent him to the academy. He told the boy to be careful, and the guy replied that everything would be fine. Yunho thought that you can still learn what they teach at the academy because rich families pay poor teachers to teach their children. That's all the guy knew about the academy from Yunho's memories. He saw the central gates of the palace opening in front of him and thought that the academy was just an excuse to go out into the outside world. He walked through the forest and breathed in the fresh air of these places. He really liked the nature that surrounded him. With every breath, he felt the natural energy building up in his body at an incredible rate. This sensation allowed him to feel that his once heavy body was getting lighter and gaining strength to go further. He felt that he now had an enormous amount of energy. He decided to test his strength in practice and understand what he was capable of. Yunho started running as fast as he could to understand what his speed was now. He climbed as high as he could to pull a leaf off a tree with his hand, and the height of his jump was incredibly high. He reached out for a leaf that was hanging from a tree branch and plucked it off. Yunho was very happy to have so much energy, and his strength increased several times over. He advanced in search of the gym and danced with happiness because the natural energy inside his body was incredibly large. It was a clear day, and white clouds floated across the sky changing shape. In his father's office, there was a deputy lord, and the chief lord was talking about how the young master himself went to the academy. He said that he couldn't believe that his son went to study at his own request at the academy, even though he had recently gone after an illness. The Lord said that it was very difficult for him to believe. It all seemed like some kind of made-up story. The deputy lord smiled and said that people often return to their old lives in the face of death and become better people. The viceroy folded his hands and said that given the young master's abilities, he was confident that the boy would become a great man and succeed as a true lord. The father wondered if the boy would be able to continue his work in the future and take over his position. The lord told the deputy lord that this guy was his favorite son, but now his intuition tells him that he is not suitable for the role of heir. The deputy lord replied that it was too early to make any decisions and we needed to wait a little longer before answering this question. The lord was sure that the guy wasn't ready yet and wanted to discuss his point of view. But suddenly a servant entered their room and addressed the lord, and the servant interrupted. During their conversation, a servant dressed in green clothes stopped at the door and informed the lord that the young master had returned home. The father ran out into the street and saw his son there. He asked what had happened and why the boy had decided to come back. Yunho stood right in front of my father and looked very shabby. His hair was disheveled in different directions and his clothes were wrinkled. The father asked why the boy had come back and what he was doing here in the middle of the day like that. Yunho, with a disgruntled expression on his face, informed his father and the vice lord that he had been expelled from the academy. The men didn't understand how they should react to this news. They were shocked that the guy had been expelled from the academy so quickly. You personally decided to go to the academy and find out from the teacher why he expelled the guys from the academy. The teacher informed the lord that the guys started a fight at the academy and was therefore expelled because such behavior goes against the rules of the academy. The teacher said that the act he had committed could hardly be called a fight because the young master had single-handedly beaten several students at the same time. The father was shocked by his son's behavior. He couldn't believe it. After all, the boy had only recently gained the strength to walk and run. When the teacher heard this, he had a surprised look on his face, because judging by the fact that the guy here started a fight like that, he clearly knows how to walk and run well. The teacher asked the father if his son had ever studied martial arts, because during a fight, he was very fast and skillful and mastered various techniques and skills. Yunho made a dissatisfied expression on his face, because this teacher understood absolutely nothing about martial arts, and what he calls speed and movement speed is called chi energy. The father turned his head to his son and asked if this teacher was telling the truth. Yunho replied that this professor speaks the absolute truth, and there are no lies in his words. Yunho crossed his arms over his chest and replied that those guys had surrounded him and started mocking him as soon as he entered the gym, thinking that after his illness, Bo wouldn't be able to fight back. Yunho said he endured all the insults and did nothing until they insulted his father and late mother. The boy said that it's not the first time this has happened, and they've been making fun of him for a long time. Yunho said that the teacher is aware of all these events and knows what really happened and why the guy had to start this fight. He asked why the teacher knew that these guys were bullying Yunho, but he still ignored everyone's actions and only reacted when the guy hit all these guys. The teacher was confused and realized that this boy had brought him to light, and now he was in a difficult situation. You were very disappointed with the teacher's behavior when you heard this whole story from your son and wanted to hear an explanation from him. But the man couldn't answer anything. His excuse was just to lower his head and get upset because he had acted so stupidly and unfairly towards the boy. The Lord started laughing very loudly and couldn't stop laughing. He was surprised that the professor thought that expelling all the hooligans from the academy would reduce the institution's income. He made a decision that would cause less damage. You said that you didn't understand this teacher's logic, and yet the boy was still expelled from the academy. It was the only academy in the region. Yunho replied that he no longer needed this academy, and that he would be able to survive and develop without it because it wouldn't be of any benefit to him anyway. Yunho suddenly stopped in front of his father, bowed to him and apologized for all the trouble he had caused him. After that gesture, the guy turned and left because he couldn't be here anymore and discuss this pointless subject. The Lord asked the deputy lord what his deputy thought about all this and how he should approach the matter. He said that the boy had a reason to fight and defeated 7 opponents on his own, and that's a very good result. The boy walked away, and they watched him. They couldn't believe that this guy had such incredible abilities, and after waking up he was much stronger. The father didn't know how to react to all the events that were happening to his son now, but he was still happy for him. The guard who guards the entrance doors to the palace saw the boy approaching him again. Yunho wanted to leave the palace again, but there was a guard in front of him who wouldn't let him pass. The head of the guard said that now the boy can come and go as he pleases, even though in the morning he has already done so. Yunho went into the forest, closer to the water. He wanted to feel nature at his side and fill his body with new energy. He sat on a large rock near the water meditating, trying to gather all his concentration on the internal flow that was coursing through his body. Yunho radiated an incredible aura from his body that could be seen from afar. He ran through the fields and tried to push his speed to the limit. In the evening light, it looked like a shadow running through the fields and forests. The boy's speed increased every day. He got stronger and faster. His body grew stronger, and little by little, he reached the result he wanted to achieve. Yunho managed to run on rocks that were at 90, and yet that didn't stop him. It was just another obstacle. He pushed the edges of these rocks with his foot, and his speed was enough for him to climb to the top of this rock without his hands. He accelerated so much when he tried to climb this rock that at the edge of the rock he leapt and jumped over it. Yunho decided to stop at the top of one of the searches and take a break. He breathed fresh air into his lungs while he was on top of the mountain, so he felt alive and worthy of this life. He felt that his legs no longer trembled and his breathing gradually stopped. Natural energy flowed into his body and filled him with chi energy. He understood that he had taken the first step towards his dream and was able to return this guy's body to a normal state in which he could move on. When he was on top of this rock, the whole city was visible in front of him, and as the sun hid behind the horizon, he admired these views every time he climbed up here. His father approached the boy and wanted to talk about something, and the boy was ready to listen to his father. The Lord asked the guy what he thinks is most important to a person. Yunho replied that the most important thing for a person is money, because every day they understand the importance of money and what they are not capable of. The father laughed and said that his son was growing up just like his father, but that this wasn't the most important thing in life, and asked what the second most important thing in life was for him. Yunho replied that the second thing that is important to him in life is the strength to save his money. The Lord was very surprised by his son's answers. He couldn't believe that this guy really thought like that at that age. The father thought about the words and said he had the strength to save money. That's a very good answer. He decided to correct his son's thinking and said that a more reasonable option would be forced to protect himself. He may lose all his purchases of some things once and for all, but he can always start again if he is strong and everything is in order with him. Yunho understood that his father was telling him the most benign truths that he himself knows, and that's why the guy didn't react at all to his father's words. Suddenly his father approached him while the guy was practicing in the backyard and suggested that the boy study martial arts. The Lord was surprised to see his son's surprised reaction. He didn't understand why his son reacted like that when he learned martial arts. Yunho remembered that martial arts were invented by monks 1,000 years ago. It would be fun to study the same martial arts that he had already mastered. But then the guy smiled and thought that learning these martial arts could be a lot of fun. He told his father that he would start studying without any problems and wanted to start immediately because he was already impatient to do so. The father was happy when his son responded positively to the study of martial arts and said that first they needed to study dongtong. Yunho asked his father what the word meant and how they could be of use to him. The Lord went with the deputy lord and his son to the training camp and said that martial arts use chi energy and the place where it is stored is called dongtong. He grabbed the belt with his hands and said that in martial arts, it is very important to create your own personal dongtong. Yunho remembered the time when he was a white fox, and this thing his father tells him reminds him of the fox account he gave to God. Yunho asked his father, "Can you take dongtong out of your body whenever you want, or is it impossible to take him out of your body?" The viceroy heard the boy's funny question and replied that he would never be able to remove dongtong from his body after creating him. He thought about the fact that this dongtong was different from the fox beads, and yet he understood theoretically how the dongtong worked. The Lord and the Vice Lord began to roll up their sleeves and get ready to start the training, and asked the young master to sit on the floor and cross his legs. The father asked the boy to close his eyes and do everything exactly as he told him to, and the boy nodded and said that he would do everything as his father told him to. The Lord told the boy not to answer any more with words. Yunho told his father out loud that he understood him. The Lord tapped the guy on the nose with his finger and reminded him that he shouldn't answer. The Lord looked at the boy and said that first he needs to open the blocked channels that flow inside his body. To do this, the guy had to take a deep breath and then exhale and control his breathing. He had to focus all his attention on that breath. An old man was riding through town with a long gray beard on his head, a hat covering his face, and he was riding a donkey. This old man was very unhappy and didn't show his face to the others. He just kept on driving. His donkey walked very slowly, and the old man was in no hurry. Drops of blood began to drip onto the marble tiles, and the father began to shout that something had happened to Yunho. He held the boy in his arms, blood dripping from his mouth, slapped him across the face, and asked him not to lose consciousness. The Lord lost control of himself and started shouting for the Vice Lord to call the doctor. But the Vice Lord had already called the doctor and said he would be there any minute. The doctor approached the boy and took his hand. He tested his wrist with his fingers and tried to understand what was happening to the child. The father told the doctor that the boy's body was suddenly overcome by heat and he lost consciousness after vomiting blood, and they couldn't understand what went wrong because everything was fine. The doctor scratched his black beard thoughtfully and looked at the boy carefully. He said that everything was fine with the child and that she had no significant problems. The doctor replied that the situation is very strange because the boy is in excellent condition, and this situation seems very strange. The father asked the doctor to repeat what he had just said because he couldn't believe it was true. The doctor looked at the boy and replied that he had seen similar cases before, and that it was just a negative reaction when too much energy builds up in the body and there is nowhere for it to splash, causing the person to lose consciousness and spit out blood. The Lord said that this is some kind of madness. It can't be that the boy has such an excessive energy because he has never studied any energy harvesting techniques and wouldn't have been able to study them without dongtong. The doctor replied that not everything is as complicated as it seems, because natural energy can be obtained without danyan, but the problem is that the energy then accumulates in the meridians and not in the danyan. The doctor noticed that this boy had a lot of energy and something needed to be done about it. He saw that the blocked meridians were successfully opened. Yunho still managed to open the meridians that are close to his heart, and this is a very difficult process that is not accessible to everyone. Singer Lord was shocked, and the doctor told them that the boy had managed to open the meridians near the heart because there are so many of them there. The doctor smiled and suggested that the Lord and Deputy Lord of Miami check the boy's open meridians because it could be done quite simply. The Lord decided to touch the meridians with his hand to see for himself and verify. He thought that the opening of the heart meridians meant that he had reached a peak and the energy inside the body was very great. He touched the boy's chest with his fingers and felt a very strange sensation because what the doctor had said was true. He couldn't understand how his son managed to independently open the meridians near his heart and pump his body so much. He was able to independently open all the closed meridians without dantan and fill his body with an enormous amount of natural energy. The Lord said in a surprised voice that all the chi energy he had collected throughout his life was equal to just 1 year. But he didn't understand how this was possible. He had been bedridden for a year and had never studied energy collection techniques or heard anything about martial arts. How he managed to accumulate energy so efficiently to open all the meridians. A man came into the training area. He was an old man, and in his low, old voice he said that he had come here to see the young master escape from the clutches of death. This old man was standing near the gate leading to the training area. His face couldn't be seen because of his big hat, but you could see his long gray beard and smile. He said that this guy had grown up a lot over the years. Yunho continued to lie down with his eyes closed and was sound asleep and resting after that when I lost consciousness. Suddenly he heard very strange sounds coming from different directions and couldn't ignore them. The guy felt that these strange sounds prevented him from sleeping and began to irritate him. He realized that the time had come to gradually open his eyes and wake up. He needed to understand where he was now and what was happening around him. When he opened his eyes, there was green grass all around him. Where he was lying, white clouds floated above him, and he wasn't at home. He tried to understand where he was now, but all he saw in front of him were lots of green trees and green fields. The last memory that remained in his head was how he, his father, and the Vice Lord created Dongtong. The boy heard a strange voice from an old man who was sitting behind him. This old man asked if the guy really wanted to study martial arts. Yunho was startled when he realized that he wasn't alone here. He immediately turned his head to look at the old man who had asked him that question. He saw his grandfather sitting on a rock in the lotus position and meditating. The guy immediately wondered who this old man was and what he was doing here. He asked the boy if he would continue to sit in one place and do nothing. The old man told the boy that according to etiquette you need to greet your clone master, and after that just continue communicating. Yunho was surprised that this old man called himself his master, and didn't understand what was going on here. After he woke up, everything became very strange to him. He was interested in the question of why the frail and weak old man declares that he will teach the boy martial arts. He was very unhappy to be here and asked the old man who was him to call himself a martial artist and asked his grandfather where they were now. The old man said that he had been asked to show this boy all the martial arts techniques and this place. Yunho looked at this old man and thought he was completely crazy because he was talking nonsense. Yunho pointed at the old man with his hand and said that he has no idea what his father said to this old man, but he wants to choose his own master. Yunho said that if the old man doesn't want to get hurt, then he'd better stop talking nonsense and explain what's really going on here. But suddenly the old man got out of his seat and quickly approached the boy, so quickly that he didn't even have time to notice anything. The old man hit the boy directly in the chest with the palm of his hand, and he felt incredible pain. He felt that he was thrown backwards with a very slight movement, but the force of this movement was incredibly powerful for an old man who doesn't look very strong. Yunho fell to the ground and started tumbling backwards. He couldn't stop the movement. He spread his arms in different directions and felt that his body hurt a lot after that blow. Yunho realized that this old man is not as simple as he might seem at first glance, because if he can deliver such blows, then he really is a true martial artist. The grass was flying in the air at that moment. The clouds were floating slowly in the big blue sky. Yunho was lying on the ground and trying to open his eyes. He felt very ill after the blow. He needed time to come to his senses. He suddenly opened his eyes wide and realized that something very strange had just happened to him. He got up from the floor and started shouting loudly. At that moment, an old man was sitting in front of him with his eyes closed. He was meditating. He was waiting for the boy to finally come to his senses and for the old man to talk to him. The master saw that the boy had woken up and said that his body was weaker than he thought. Yunho was angry with this old man for hitting him and said he didn't want to communicate with him because it was no use. The old man smiled when he saw the guy and said that he was still very young and inexperienced. His beard hadn't even started to grow yet. Yunho got angry with this old man and decided to attack him. He said that he didn't want to talk to him and that it would be better to end the conversation with a fight. The master managed to repel the boy's attack with one hand. He didn't even open his eyes because he saw no threat in this child. He blocked the boy's blow and made his own counterattack, after which the boy flew backwards and spun around his body. He flew a few meters backwards and fell to the ground. The clouds at that moment continued to fly slowly across the sky. Yunho was lying on the floor with his hands raised, and there was a bruise near his face near his left eye, and he thought about what he had done several times that day in the video sky. The guy tried to get up from the floor again and held his head with his hand. He tried to feel the bruise with his fingers. The master said he wanted to get this over with and move on to more important matters, after which he got up from the floor and stood in front of the boy. He raised his hand and said that he could fulfill the boy's wish and leave him behind once and for all, but there was one condition. The boy had to grab the master by the hem of his clothes. He set these conditions for the guy and said that if he didn't do this, the boy would have to accept him as his new master and obediently become his student. Yunho was very unhappy that this old man was imposing conditions on him and asked his grandfather why he should agree to this bet. The old man grabbed the ends of the garment with 2 fingers and defiantly lifted the garment, showing it to the guy. He held part of his clothes in his hand and said that if a guy isn't sure if he can grab the hem of an old man's clothes with his hand, then what kind of warrior can he be? Yunho began to get even angrier with this old man because he had hurt his feelings and he believed that no one could talk to him like that and call him weak. In a past life, Yunho was the king of the yokai world and was capable of destroying an entire world single-handedly and could not allow anyone to mock him. The old man saw that this boy had a burning desire to complete this task and closed his eyes to prepare for the defense. When Yunho reached out to take the old man's clothes, the old man jumped up high and disappeared. The old man flew very high and was surprised that the guy had so much strength and energy because he lifted a large part of the earth. At that moment, when he was flying in the air, he thought this guy was moving like a huge palm tree in a gust of wind. The old man fell to the ground and stopped on the big rock. The guy saw him and thought that this grandfather was jumping like a rabbit. Yunho decided not to waste any time, jumped up and tried to attack the old man again. This time he wanted to attack him and grab him by the skin rather than the cloth. But when the boy landed, he hit it with his hands and it didn't break into several different pieces, and the old man again managed to dodge it by jumping to the side. He was already away from the boy and laughed at the fact that this guy can't control his emotions and gets angry every time something doesn't work out for him. The master laughed and said that his skin was already dry and rough because he was old, but still didn't look like stone. Yunho took a large stone in his hand and wanted to throw it at the old man to get back at him. He was very angry because the old man was constantly joking and laughing at him. He threw a rock at this old man and thought he'd be 100% capable of hitting him. The master saw that a stone flew in front of his face and he barely had time to dodge it. He wasn't prepared for such an act on the guy's part. Yunho took advantage of the fact that the old man had turned his attention to the flying stone and decided to run closer to him. The master was amazed at this guy's ingenuity. He didn't think this boy was thinking before he did it. But even though the old man was distracted by the stone, he still managed to escape the guy's grasp by making circular movements to the side. Yunho couldn't understand how this old man could move so fast. The master looked in surprise at this boy and realized that he was already running straight towards. He realized that this guy moves very fast and maybe he's inexperienced and clumsy now, but his movements are very fast and his energy is enough to catch up with the old man. Yunho took advantage of the old man's carelessness and ran up to him as close as possible and touched his chest with his hand. Yunho placed his palm on the old man's chest and a bright light appeared around his palm. Ah smiled and said that the old man has finally been caught, and now he won't be able to escape. The master gritted his teeth and felt that the guy could still touch his body. The old man started laughing very loudly, and this reaction was incomprehensible to the boy. He was surprised that this old man was laughing at him now, because he had caught him. The master said that this guy has very good qualities for a brat who doesn't know how to do anything. Yunho was very surprised by this reaction. He felt uncomfortable because it was the old man who had scorned him and called him straight, even though he had fulfilled the terms of their agreement. The master hit the guy with his hand, and the boy flew backwards and received a lot of damage. When Yunho was flying, he thought that this damned old man really annoyed him, and he wanted to get rid of him as quickly as possible. Night came, but the clouds continued to float slowly across the sky like in the morning. The master visited the boy's father, and the father said that he had heard that the master was testing the boy today for martial arts talent. The father said he would be very sad if the boss accidentally hurt the boy during the inspection. The master said that the boy wouldn't grow up if he didn't see the sky. The father at that moment looked at the old man very surprised and asked what he meant. The master smiled and looked at the boy's father. He said the guy was very impatient and rude, but more importantly, he was absolutely untrained. The father looked at the old man with great surprise, and the master replied that his son had an innate talent for martial arts. He said that even his younger brother, who was called a martial arts genius, wasn't as talented at that age as Yunho. The father was speechless at the moment, but then he pulled himself together and said that the master's younger brother is the current head of the Naman family and the leader of the Miram alliance. He said that his name is rightfully included in the list of the 20 for strongest warriors, and he is called the strongest of Murin, the king of the sword Nam Gong Jin. He said that the master was probably joking when he said that because his son can't be such a strong warrior, and the old man replied that he couldn't say that out loud, and we understood everything. The father was very surprised to learn that his son was a good candidate for martial arts students. The master said that he could be considered just a greedy old man who wants to make money from this family, but that's not the case. He said that it was the first time he had seen such a strong student, and that he really wanted to turn the boy into a strong martial artist and introduce him to the world. The father replied that he had no reason to refuse if the master personally wanted to train him. The old man started laughing and said that there was one problem he couldn't solve. He started laughing and said that the boy managed to grab the master by the hem of his clothes, and he won the bet. Yunho was sitting on his bed in his room thinking about something. He was very tired and angry. There was a big bruise on his face after being beaten by this old man, and he was angry at the old man for what happened to him today. He didn't understand why the old man hit him the moment the boy managed to grab his clothes. The father escorted the master out of the palace and said that it was already midnight, so he asked the master to think about this situation again. But for now it was time for him to go and rest. The old man replied that the man's word imposed this, and he couldn't do anything about it. He said that he and the master had known each other for a long time, and so he asked him to think again and do him a favor. They suddenly stopped in place, and the old man saw that Yunho was standing in front of them, who they weren't talking about. The father looked at the boy in surprise and didn't understand why he was here now. Yunho stood right in front of them and silently looked into the old man's eyes. His face was swollen and bruised. The father asked his son what he was doing here at the moment and why he wasn't in his room right now. Yunho said he needed to talk to the old man about important things and wanted to discuss it now. He asked the master why the boy's attacks didn't work on the old man, no matter how hard he tried. Yunho said he wanted to learn this skill and asked the old man to teach him everything he knew. Suddenly, for everyone, the guy fell to his knees and sat obediently in front of the old man. He had to overcome his pride and forget his principles and past life to learn new martial arts skills. He bowed his head and called the old man his new master. At that moment, the old man looked at the boy and closed his eyes to think for a few seconds. Yunho bowed his head and waited for the master's consent that he wanted to be hired as a student. But the master replied that he didn't want to teach that boy now, and Yunho was very surprised and angry at the old man's answer. Yunho recalled a conversation with his uncle in which his uncle told him about a great martial artist from the Nong family. His name was Young Nama. Yunho asked his uncle who this man was because he had never heard anything about him. Uncle said that this is a great martial artist who has no equal in this world. The uncle tried to explain to the boy that this is the best martial arts teacher and he has no equal, and the boy thought about it. He said it was a great honor for the bull boy to be a student. Yunho remembered that he was the person who appeared in front of Taga without any courtesy, so that's the old man's point that the boy is his disciple. Yunho thought that he didn't like bowing to this old man because it was too much of an honor for him. He understood that all the creatures in the yokai world would start laughing at him if they found out about this. But he understood that he was now in the wrong situation to worrying about it. The boy, however, accepted the reality of his situation and bowed to his master, all because he wanted to become stronger and was ready to overcome his pride to do so. It had been 2 years since the training, and it was winter outside. Then the whole forest was covered in snow, and it was very cold outside. White snow was on the branches and trees. But suddenly the tree felt a strong vibration and snow fell from the branch. Loud sounds of swords being struck were heard in the forest. These sounds were created by a boy and his master. They fought in training areas in the forest to hone their skills and moved very quickly through the forest. The master fought the guy and allowed him to improve his attacks in battle. Yunho attacked the old man's sword very quickly with his sword, but was unable to break through his defense. Suddenly they started copying each other's moves and changed their battle plan. The master began to accumulate magical white energy in his left friend. Yunho understood that the best way to protect himself from the old man's attack was to repeat his movements, and he also began to accumulate light energy in the palm of his hand. They simultaneously slapped their hands against their bodies, and their movements were absolutely mirrored. There was a strong explosion in the fox between the two of them, and a burst of energy and snow began to fly in the air. The old man felt that it was very difficult for him to continue the battle with this guy because he was already old, and the boy acted very quickly and clearly. Yunho looked surprised at this old man and saw that the master wasn't feeling well. The master started yelling at the boy for trying to kill the old man and asked him to restrain himself and be more careful when using such strong blows. Yunho raised his sword and leaned his head on it. He said that his master was the first to take this stance, and all he had to do was repeat it. The master said he had no other choice. He had to take this stance to defend himself, and now his hands are red and hurting. They took a break to rest for a while, and the master said that so far, it's hard for him to fight with the boy, and the guy replied that it's all because the master is very old. The master said that the boy has a very stupid habit that annoys him. The guy is constantly talking garbage. They were silent for several minutes, and then the old man said that now was the time, and the guy looked at the old man in surprise. The movie master gave the boy a red package containing a long object. He told the boy to take it for himself and shut up. Yunho decided to open this package. He took out the red cloth and saw that inside was a large black long sword. The old man said that this sword is special. He has already given it time to fall at the old man's feet without recognizing the owner, and that means it needs a new owner. Yunho said that the master was mocking him again and gave him the sword to simply support him and then retrieve it, but the master replied that the boy should draw the blade. Yunho listened to his master and decided to take the sword out of its sheath so that he could see it in full force. He raised the sword in the air and held it in front of his face. This sword was very beautiful and light. He began to move the sword and try to understand what it was capable of. Yunho was surprised by the similarity of this ball and thought he would at least try to perform various combat combinations with this sword. He began to perform combat combinations by moving from place to place and attacking an invisible enemy. The blade moved very quickly, its blade cutting through the air. The master looked in surprise at his pupil, who was now in control. Blade so well that the blade continued to cut through the air and leave behind a brilliant reflection. The master thought that when you reached the peak, you could surpass ordinary ball skills by covering the ball with chi. The boy struck with this sword with great skill and ability, and you could see the aura of the sword. Not everyone could do that. The master had to spend many years to see the aura of the sword, and he only did this when his hair was already gray. But only 2 years have passed since the boy took the sword in his hands, and he has already achieved this result. Yunho decided to test the strength of this sword and found a rock not far from him, and decided to strike this rock to cut it. When he struck this stone with his sword, the stone split into 2 halves, and in the middle of the stone, there was a mark from the blade of the sword. Yunho said that this was a very good sword, and he liked it, thanks to which he was able to very successfully split a stone into 2 halves, as if he were cutting bread. Master asked Yunho to approach him because he wanted to talk about something. The old man said he had an idea of this boy's maximum strength, and the guy asked how strong he is. The master said that the boy practiced the best Namgong family sword technique in the world and completely mastered even his family's strongest technique, which is called the imperial sword skill. He said that the boy should now be strong enough to defeat the elders of the major factions. Yunho turned his head to the side and pretended that this information was of absolutely no interest to him and began to move on. The master looked at the boy in surprise and said that he didn't look happy after hearing that, but then said that for the first time he had seen a warrior as strong and genius in martial arts as Yunho. Yunho replied to the old man that he didn't want to get stronger, and that's how the master looked at him in surprise. Yunho looked at the old man and said that he didn't want the influence of technology to hold him down and tie his hands, but the master didn't understand what the boy was talking about and asked him to explain his thoughts to him. The guy said that the Nigan family swordsmanship is the best in the world, and that's undoubtedly why he's gotten so strong. He raised his hand and looked at her, and then said that, however, he believed that these techniques would actually be better than they are, and now he feels that they are hindering his true ability and strength. The master asked the guy how it was possible that this great technique, which is the strongest in the world, could restrict his ability. He asked the boy how this is possible, and there is even more power in it than it might seem. Yunho understood that it would be very stupid to explain his feelings to his master and decided to show it in practice. He turned his head to the side and tried to find a suitable object with his eyes. He saw a large, strong tree that had been growing on this hill for several thousand years and thought that this object would suit him well. He took his sword out of its sheath and drew it to execute his blow. His eyes lit up with bright blue lights, and he saw the goal in front of him and realized he didn't want to stop. He pulled out the sword in front of him and straightened his hand. A blue ray of energy appeared from the sword. This beam of energy was able to pierce the trunk of the tree and make a hole in it. For the first time in his life, the master saw an attack so strong that he couldn't believe his eyes. Yunho wanted to show the master his abilities and his true strength. He wanted to show all the energy that was inside him and began to swing his sword. A huge hole started to appear in the tree, and it spun in a circle and broke the tree trunk. Waves of energy emerged from this hole that destroyed the trunk of the tree. They spread over a long distance and caused very heavy damage. The master got up from the log he was sitting on and started to walk backwards. He didn't understand what was happening because he had never seen anything like it before. Yunho began to feel that he was finally throwing off the energy that had filled his body and wanted to throw off even more energy. He attacked with his sword, and there was a huge explosion in front of him, and nothing was visible because everything in front of him was white. The force of the explosion the boy made was incredible. It was impossible to contain and could destroy anything. This explosion broke everything within its radius, and its radius occupied a very large space. The snow has started to fall from the sky. This is the same snow that has just risen from the ground and started to fall to the ground again. Yunho sheathed his sword and finally finished his attack. He got into a fighting stance that meant the end of the attack and the end of the miss, and observed the damage he had just caused. Yunho looked at the huge hole in the ground that he had only managed to make with a single burst of energy, and the old man would have been horrified at what had happened here. He thought his aura sword was excellent. This guy is capable of a real miracle, and what the old man has just seen cannot be expressed in words. The master looked at the boy and realized that what he had just seen was this word about synergy, the concept of limitlessness, and the very essence of martial arts. The master asked the boy how long he had been learning such strong attacks, and the guy told the old man that he had tried it for the first time and had just learned it. The master got tired of the guy and hid his hands behind his back. He said that he was sure that the boy had surpassed his teacher, but he had no idea that the difference between them was so great. Yunho said that the master finally knows that and doesn't need to prove anything anymore, and the old man called the guy an arrogant child. The master said that if the boy has only just started doing this technique, it means that he hasn't completed it yet, and the guy didn't reply that everything is exactly as it is. The master says that the teacher said he wanted to see this guy's technique in full force and see how far he could go. The master said that he would help the boy achieve incredible results because his extensive knowledge accumulated. He traveled the world and saw different martial arts would be useful to Yunho. He looked at the old man, who had to think about whether it was worth accepting his help or whether it was better to continue learning on his own. Yunho said that he would feel very ashamed if there was no significant training from the old man, and the master said that one day he would kill this child. The master understood that he could only give this boy the knowledge he possessed and told him that the beginning of martial arts was launched by a follower of the Dharma. Also involved in the development of martial arts were the Buddhist master Sang and the first celestial demon. Yunho listened attentively to everything this master was telling him, and the names he had just mentioned were very familiar to him, but he couldn't understand how he knew them. Then the guy remembered that a man named Sambong was the same person who came to him in a past life. Now he finally remembered this man. He came to him with his idiot monk and accepted the I and the Yang technique. But suddenly he remembered the same girl he had loved, remembered her figure, and that wonderful moment when she was with him. He opened his eyes wide and froze at that moment. He couldn't think of anything else. Her image froze before his eyes. He remembered her beautiful face and eyes. He remembered her smell and felt a strange sense of melancholy. He was very sad to have remembered her. After all, he had only recently managed to forget her. He thought he was wondering if I'm okay with my brother in the underworld. The old man said that if the boy had been born then, and there he would have been able to fight with this great martial artist and become the strongest warrior. Yunho started to laugh when he heard the old man's words because he remembered that once upon a time he had defeated this man and it had been very easy. The master turned his head towards the guy and stopped. He wondered why the boy was laughing. The master asked the guy why his words made him laugh so much, and the guy scratched his head. He felt strange, and he replied that he had just remembered a funny situation. The master replied to the boy that there's nothing funny about becoming the strongest martial arts warrior in history. It's not a joke, but a very serious position. Yunho looked at the sword his master had given him, and thought it was time to use it. He took it out of its sheath and drew his blade. Yunho said that first he took the sword to become stronger, but now his goal is to become like the sword itself. He closed his eyes and decided to focus his attention on the energy that was now in his body. He opened his eyes and looked straight ahead. His eyes began to glow with blue lights again. He made a slight movement with his sword, and a wave of air appeared around him that scattered the leaves and stones around him. The master drew his sword and said that the guy would die or get hurt if he couldn't block the blow. If that happened, the old man would be branded a teacher who killed his student. He asked the student if he was ready to fight and try to fight a real opponent. Yunho looked at his teacher and nodded in agreement, showing that he was ready to fight. The master used his chi energy and his eyes began to glow white. He looked at his student like an opponent. He started running towards her, moving his legs quickly. The old man moved very quickly. Although he was already very old, his movements were still fast. He was on his way to meet the guy, and understood that he would now have to use the experience of his entire life that he had accumulated over so long to fight the boy. He leapt up and wanted to strike with his sword, into which he was going to put all the strength he had and all the experience he had gained throughout his life. Yunho stood up and obediently waited for the smaller man to get close enough to block the blow. He was very calm and didn't worry that he might die. He knew that he would sense the right moment to repel this blow. At the right moment, he raised his sword and blocked up to the master, and the master's sword began to break into small fragments. The old man had never seen anything like it in his life. This guy managed to block the blow so well that the sword that had served him for many years broke against this guy's defenses. Yunho used an enormous amount of energy to block his master's blow, and a large bright flash appeared between them. This flash was so strong that it could be seen several kilometers away, and the master jumped over his student and flew after him. The flash disappeared and the master fell to the ground, and the guy remained motionless. Yunho sheathed his sword and calmly finished his defensive combination. After he sprayed such a large amount of energy around them, the air became very cold, and when the guy exhaled, steam appeared from his mouth. The old man started to laugh, but it wasn't a happy laugh, it was a surprised laugh. He held in his right hand a broken sword of which practically nothing remained and realized that his sword unity and chi energy had been destroyed. He looked at this sword and realized that the greatest enlightenment he had grasped all his life had proved useless. He asked the boy how many strokes he had already taken with the sword, and one guy replied that he had just taken 1,000 strokes. The master, in a sad voice, informed the boy that he had just completed his technique and had now mastered it completely. Yunho agreed with his master and said that this technique doesn't have a name yet, and said that it needs to be called something. The old man stood on the edge of the cliff and said that the arrogance of this sword is limitless and hurts the heavens. He said that this technique could be called trampling the sky because even the sky begins to tremble with fear at the sight of this technique. He said that the sword in the guy's hands should be called the sword that crushed the heavens. Yunho was very surprised to learn that his sword had this name. He raised his head and looked at the sky. He thought he had an artifact. This was his sword that could crush the great sky itself. The old man decided to ask the boy if they had chosen a very pretentious name for his sword. After all, he was only sharing his thoughts with him. But Yunho was satisfied with this name, and from the look on his face you could tell that it was impossible to even come up with a better name for his sword. Yunho thought about the fact that after 5 years of training with the master, he created and completed the strongest sword technique of all time, called the sky-crushing sword. The master stopped in front of him and called the guy crazy. The sun was shining brightly in the sky, and it was very hot because summer had arrived. The city was located in a valley and hidden between high mountains. Yunho walked through the courtyard of their palace and tried to warm himself to wake up. The boy went into his father's office and said that he had finally arrived, but his father scolded him and said that he had overslept. The guy scratched his head and said this: he overslept because he was reading the master's teachings late into the night and studying. The father smiled and said that there was nothing wrong with that, and the guy arrived on time and asked to go into the gym and take his sister Somi with him. Yunho asked why he had to do this, because it was the vice lord's duty, and his father replied that he had asked for a few days off to visit his sick mother. Yunho said that in this case his father can send his servant to several guards, because after the guy eats, he wants to train, but his father told him that Yunho is the strongest and most reliable person in the Supreme Coalition. The father said that he couldn't entrust this matter to anyone but his son, and he was the one who did it. Yunho made a dissatisfied expression on his face, showing with all his appearance that he didn't want to do this, but he still agreed and said that he would comply with his father's request. The guy was crossing the bridge to pick up his sister and thought that because of his training, he really hadn't seen his sister for a long time. Suddenly he stopped and saw something very strange in front of him. He saw a tree in front of him, which gave him the idea that for some reason he had begun to obey his father unquestioningly and take care of his sister. He was becoming more and more like the real Yunho every day. The guy started to get angry with himself and said that he was Yunho and not that Yunho brat, and all the way to his sister, he tried to talk to himself. The academy was on the outskirts of the city, and its roof could be seen from afar because it was higher than the trees. At the exit of this building, there was a sign saying that this Golden Academy is the best institution in the city. Yunho felt like throwing up every time he saw this sign above the entrance to the gym. It absolutely did not correspond to its name. He saw a carriage in front of him and thought that people say that only the rich can educate children in this institution, but they even sent carriages to show its importance. He thought about the fact that Vidslor also comes here every time by carriage to pick up his sister. Because the guy was irritated at the thought of coming here by carriage, he felt strange about it. A man in a red shirt who was working with horses looked at Yunho. This man was unhappy because the guy was standing not far from his carriage and asked why that brat was looking at him like that. Yunho smiled and thought that this man was beginning to irritate him, and if he continued in the same spirit, a fight would start here. This man started to get angry because the teenager who was standing not far from his carriage was smiling and acting so cheeky. He started walking towards the guy and raised his hand to him. He said that this guy was bumping into him and now he was going to hit him like he was the owner of this carriage. Yunho immediately put his hand on his sword to defend himself against this abnormal man. This gentleman also took the sword in his hand and said that now he was going to fight this guy to teach him a lesson. Yunho decided to act more wisely and showed him a gold badge because he knew it would be easy for him to defeat this weakling too. The man saw the golden badge and immediately paled with fear, feeling strange drops of sweat running down his face. That golden tablet the guy showed had a cloud pattern and the TN symbol. The man immediately realized that this guy was a member of one of the great alliances of the Supreme Coalition. Yunho looked arrogantly at this worthless idiot and asked whose carriage this is now. Somi came out of the academy and immediately started running like a carriage because she thought that today I would be greeted by the Vice Lord as usual. But I saw that today her brother was picking her up at the gym and she was very happy, so she started running even faster. She jumped on him and hugged him because she was so happy that he had come here today to pick her up. Yunho said that she is 16 and has grown up but still jumps on his neck every time she sees him. Somi said she doesn't care about other people's opinions and she just loves her brother. That's why she always jumps into his arms, but the guy said he meant it for me. She smiled and looked at him because she understood that her brother always complains when he doesn't like something, but still loves it. She looked at this girl and thought that she probably looked a lot like the deceased, and he realized that she had become much prettier in recent years. She didn't hold his hand and said that when they go home they can't go to the market for a snack, but the guy said that she's still holding on to him and asked how long this will continue. The man looked at these two guys and followed them with his gaze. He was interested to know who this guy was and where he came from here. His son, Cio Gak Ju, approached his son, and the man asked the boy if he knew this guy. The boy replied that this young gentleman is a member of the Supreme Coalition and asked the man if he couldn't understand that from his appearance. In the city it was very quiet and calm. The night came and all the lights of the building came on. Many people were in the streets. Dad was sitting at his desk and was very worried about something. On his desk was a black envelope with a stamp, and on it was written whose envelope it was, and the man hadn't opened it yet. He was very excited about this envelope and was upset when he received it. The father heard his son and daughter walking down the corridor, and they were talking about how the girl had eaten a lot of food but was still hungry, and she told him that she had a special stomach. Yoonho opened the door to his father's office and said that he had already arrived home and had brought his sister here, and the girl greeted her father and said that he had returned from the gym. Somi saw his father's worried face and asked what had happened because he seemed very upset. Dad looked down and said he had to tell them the terrible news he'd heard this morning. He told the children that the old master died 2 days ago at dawn. This news was very unexpected for the guy, and he didn't understand how to react because he didn't think anything could happen to the master. Several carriages traveled on the Fox, accompanied by guards, and headed for another city. Father sat in a carriage and thought that the master had died. He tried to accept this thought. Somi was also very upset by this news because she knew that this master was someone very close to her family. Yoonho pretended that he wasn't at all interested in this information, and in fact everything was completely different. The boy tried to recall the important moments he had to spend with this person and replayed the memories in his memory. He remembered the moment he was associated with his master that day. The master was walking on his oil, the boy was walking behind him and talking about how he just wanted to live the way he wanted to. The master told his student that this is a very difficult path, but good for the strongest, for those people who want to reach the pinnacle of martial arts and become. The best thing the master said was that you want to see for yourself how the guy is going to get on, and he wondered how long he had left in this world to stay alive. Yoonho, as always, tried to be sarcastic and joke, and said that the old man had very little left considering his appearance. The historian called him a parasite. He asked the boy not to spill too much blood, and if bloodshed couldn't be avoided then to reduce it as much as possible, because the boy's strength was very great, and he had to learn to control it. Yoonho said that the old man gives him too many rules, and he wants to live according to his wishes. The old man lowered his head and said that in this world, everything is very complicated, and he doesn't know how long everything will continue the way he wants it to. He hoped that words like demon and blood would never be associated with this boy's name and would not desecrate his glory. The master said that the 5 years I spent with this guy were very long and hectic, and he doesn't regret having taught such a unique student. Yoonho remembered these moments and replayed them constantly in his head. He didn't like what the teacher said to him, but he understood that these words were indeed correct. He thought that after death people go to the underworld, and it's more like the beginning than the end of life. He said he wanted to see him again and talk to him one last time. A motorcade of 2 carriages, accompanied by guards, traveled up a long ramp to another town to arrive at the funeral of an old man. More often than not, it was possible to see many tall, gray roofs against the backdrop of a very large mountain. At the entrance to the palace, there was a plaque saying that the Nam Gong family lived here. On this day, many people from different cities came to say goodbye to the old man and went to the palace, and some met and communicated for the first time in a long time. Near the entrance there was a group of 3 men, one of whom had a notebook in his hand, where they wrote down the guests. The rest of the people were simply surprised to see 2 carriages approaching them. All the people who were already near the palace looked at these carriages and tried to understand who had come here and who was in these carriages. Suddenly, a man from the crowd noticed a man walking in front of this horse carriage and said that this was the great guardian of the Supreme Coalition. This man smiled and said that all the guards are elite martial artists. The second man replied that they are stronger than the so-called first-class masters. The Supreme Guardian got off his horse and greeted the man who met him. He said he was the supreme guardian Kwui and reported that Master Hajin had arrived here and read along with his sons. The man smiled and said that he was very happy to see the busiest man in the Central Valley here because he had come a long way to get here. He said he was very honored that Hainu himself had arrived here and his father greeted the chief of Nong. Yunho thought that the union is treated in the same way as the merchant's family, and that's why they visit such a big family, but the boss personally came to meet his father, which means he's an important person. He realized that the head of this family behaves as if the same professor from the academy gets into trouble, and it seems that this idiot is afraid of his father's financial power. Hajin said he came here to honor the memory of the great teacher. The two guys behind the head of the family were very surprised that their grandfather was the teacher of one of these strangers. The boss said that your uncle would like your family to come here anyway. He introduced the head of this palace to his children. He introduced him to his son and daughter. Somi bowed to this gentleman and said that it was part of her to meet the head of such a large family. He held out his hand and said that his uncle always mentioned this sweet lady in his conversations and advised him to accept her as a granddaughter or niece because she is a very smart and beautiful girl. The boss turned his head in the other direction and saw a guy standing there and decided to guess who he was. He said this boy's name is probably Yunho. He smiled and decided to ask the boy if his uncle really taught him martial arts. Yunho said that he had studied various techniques from the Nong family. The boys were very shocked to hear this information. After all, they didn't understand how it was possible for the family's martial arts techniques to be transferred to a stranger. The boss raised his hand and gestured to these guys that they'd better shut up now and not say anything else. He told these guys to shut up and stop making a scene in front of the guests they love so much. He looked at the boy with a look of contempt and realized that this guy could be very dangerous for them. Yunho looked at this man and didn't like the feeling he had for the boy. The gentleman put his hands together and smiled, apologized for the audacity of these guys, and asked them to understand that they don't know the etiquette well, saying that I don't understand the situation. Hai unfolded his hands and said that there was no need to apologize, but only asked the master to teach his son martial arts so that he could defend himself, and said that he hoped the Nong family would forgive him for this selfish request. They started walking, and the head of the family said that these people have come a long way anyway, and he personally must show them everything that is here. Clouds floated across the sky and changed shape. The boy was walking through the forest and constantly tried to sniff out something with his nose. He constantly changed the trajectory of his movements and tried to smell. He couldn't figure out where the strange smell was coming from. Then the guy could still smell it and said it was the smell of a real monster. He understood that the smell led to the town that was near the mountain, where a painting hung. On the wall depicting an old master, in front of the painting was a golden vase, and in the center of the vase was a red candle. Was a large room where anyone could come to say goodbye to the master. Yunho went to the door that led to this room and saw that the dead master was here. He saw the master's image and felt uncomfortable about being here. He wanted to talk to the master and couldn't get used to the fact that he was already dead. Yunho went out to the yard with his sister, and the girls said that there were a lot of people here. Sister said that, in addition to people from the 9 great clans and 5 famous families, there are even people of some gender here. Yunho asked her sister how she knew all this, and the girl said that she had seen her father meeting many of them, but he didn't know that the girl was spying on him at the time. Her action impressed the guy, and he thought this girl was much better than she seemed at first glance. The father saw the children and said that he would accompany the boss so that they could rest here for the time being and have something to eat. Yunho said that she wanted to go for a walk in these territories and told her sister that here she can take as much food as she wants and maybe she finally satisfy her hunger. The man drank alcohol from a glass and put the glass on the table, making a very loud sound. He was very dissatisfied with something and said he'd had enough. He didn't want to do it anymore. He was very indignant because that funeral was very sad and he didn't like it. The guy in the brown clothes said that it would be much more fun if a pretty woman sat next to them, and they all agreed that a pretty woman could cheer them up. The man in the red clothes turned his head to the right to look for a girl and suddenly saw her. Somi was at that moment at the next table and was clearing the table to sit at it. She was very cheerful and happy in her own business. This man immediately took a liking to her. He turned his full attention to her and said that now they were going to have a girl at the table. A girl shouting was heard in the yard. She didn't understand what was happening. The man took her hand and began to hold it. She asked him to let go and said she was in a lot of pain. He behaved very arrogantly and wouldn't let go of the girl. After that, she asked what was wrong with him and why he grabbed her. He thought she was flirting with him like that and asked why she was so rude to him, because he just wanted this girl to sit next to them and share the pain for the dead old man. He said she'd better not turn them into bandits. They're really very good. Somi felt that her hand hurt a lot because this guy was squeezing it so hard, but she was afraid to scream and ask for help. Yunho was behind this guy. At the time, he said that these dissolute animals dared to come to the funeral and touch his sister with their dirty hands. He turned his head back and saw this guy in front of him. The girl said it was her brother. The man asked the guy behind him, "This is the same young gentleman who is a member of the Supreme Coalition." Yunho didn't answer this guy, or he exhaled and showed his dislike for this man with his face. Yunho said he was very curious that this guy was being rude to the girl. "I know, she's the daughter of the leader of the Supreme Coalition." He smiled and turned his head back and looked at the two men sitting there, and then said that this guy was probably joking when he said that. He said that his name is Ping Zi, and he is the eldest young master of the Ping family of H. He said that he and his friends just wanted to talk to his sister for a while and called the guy a puppy. He looked at the guy with contempt and said that he wanted to put aside the fact that Yunho had misunderstood the situation due to his sister's reaction, but was offended when the guy called him an animal. As Ping Zia leaned her head closer to the guy and smiled, he said that he deserved a small apology for this insult, but Yunho remained still and silent. The guys sitting at the big table started laughing and said that now the funniest part of the holiday would begin. Yunho smiled when he realized that this idiot now really wants to get into a conflict. He said that your idiot should apologize to his sister for his rude behavior and get out of here in peace, or in a serious case, he'll make you feel awkward in front of all the guests present. Hainin felt humiliated and insulted. After all, no one had ever communicated with him in this tone before. He stood in front of the guys, straightened his shoulders, after which he said that everyone knows that traitors have nothing but money, and understood that the guy couldn't do anything to him and resist such a great force. Yunho smiled when he saw this idiot's self-confidence and once again called him a stupid animal who will always be a stupid animal. Pon raised his hand to attack and said that this guy could hardly survive such insults. Somi turned away in fear and started screaming. She tried to close her eyes so she wouldn't see the fights that were happening here now. Yunho calmly dodged the thug's blow and didn't even move. He just leaned back. Pon was surprised that this guy dodged the blow and asked where he could learn these tricks. Yunho decided not to answer this idiot's question and instead kicked his leg to knock him down. Pon fell to the ground and hit his back, and at that moment the guy remained still on the ground without moving. Yunho took this thug by the leg and said that now he's going to show what else he knows about these tricks. He grabbed the bandit's leg and turned to the side, and people heard a loud noise as if his bone had broken. Pon started screaming loudly and writhing in pain. People, they were shocked by this guy's abilities. They said he was crazy because he broke a big man's ankle. Somi was very surprised that her brother could fight so well. This bandit's friends couldn't stay away when they saw that they had just defended their friend and started running up to the guy to fight with him. But Yunho was able to dodge all his attacks with just one leap, and all his attacks were meaningless. During the flight, he hit one of the guys right in the face with his heel. Then he kicked another guy with his other leg and broke his nose. The guy in the brown clothes flew to the next table and broke the food of these people scattered in different directions, and his nose was bleeding. The second guy also flew to the side and fell to the ground. His nose was broken, and he was bleeding. Han tried to get up from the floor. He was shaking with rage and said he would kill this idiot now. But Yunho stopped this thug by stepping on his face with his foot and slamming his forehead into the ground. Yunho said that this man called him a puppy, and that means that his father and leader of the Supreme Coalition is a puppy. He said he could happily kill this brat now, here and now, but the master asked him about very important requests. And if it hadn't been for his master's request, this idiot would no longer be alive here. Yunho stomped on this guy's head with his foot, and he started screaming in pain. Suddenly a man in blue clothes appeared and said that the two opponents should stop here immediately and end the fight. He looked around and saw a man in brown clothes lying on the ground. It was Mayan Su from the Moaning, and he looked very bad. His face was beaten, and he was spitting blood. On the other side, Sukorol of the Hang family was lying down, His nose was broken and blood was running down his face. And in the center of that fight, Peasy was lying on the ground, and this guy put his foot on his head. Somi stood aside and held her hand. She was very frightened by the behavior of these thugs. Tears began to appear in her eyes, and she felt insulted. The man began to understand what had happened here and realized that these idiots had dared to offend the daughter of the leader of the Supreme Coalition. Yunho said that he can see in this man's face that he doesn't need to explain the situation that happened here. He was in a very difficult situation and urgently needed to take some steps to resolve it. He said that his name is Gungan, and he is the deputy head and responsible for enforcing the family rules, and asked them to stop this guy's activities because they would then deal with this incident according to the family rules. Yunho said that judging by the way these guys openly harassed the daughter of the leader of the Supreme Coalition and insulted his son and themselves at the master's funeral, this is all very strange. He asked this guy if he thought the Namgong family rules were too lenient. Yunho said that he really hopes that the law enforcement officials don't go easy on these thugs just because they are representatives of the 5 famous families. Yunho made this guy feel awkward and in a terrible situation. People at that moment were discussing this situation that had happened in the palace courtyard and were trying to understand if this young gentleman was really a member of the Supreme Coalition, and at that moment a man was sitting in the background drinking tea. This man said that 3 masters known for their strength were defeated by a syndicate heir. He found it very strange. He put a cup on the table. The old man said that this was a very interesting situation and that he would be interested in understanding it. Somi gave her brother her hand so that he could see the bruises. The girl said that this man grabbed her hand and tried to take her away. She politely refused. Yunho carefully examined her hand and said that her hand will hurt for a while, but if she uses medicine and ointments, these bruises will disappear in a few days. Suddenly a man approached them and started coughing to attract their attention. The guy turned his face away, head and looked at this man. The old man smiled and asked these guys if he could sit with them and join their company. Yunho looked at this incredulous old man and thought that he clearly needed something from them. The old man gave the guy a shrewd look and tried to convince him with his gaze that he could be trusted. Yunho noticed that the rope hanging from the old man's belt was red and blue. That this old man had a rope on his belt with 8 knots tied in it, and his clothes were very worn out. The guy said that of all the looks he saw in the crowd, only one look irritated him. Yunho immediately understood who this man was because he stood out so much from all the other guests. He said that this old man was the elder of the beggars sect. The old man started laughing and was delighted that this guy had guessed who he was so quickly. They sat at the table and continued talking. The old man said that his joke had gone too far. He introduced himself to these young people and said that his name was Chu Guangji and that he made his living by begging. Chu Guang started to ask the guy how the late teacher had taught this boy, but Yunho was suspicious of the man and asked what he wanted from them. Guango would sometimes start behaving very strangely as if he were crazy, and the old man would shout that the guy couldn't hide the truth from him. He started talking about how he lives alone, he has a good eye for talent, and he just saw Sumi in this boy as a great talent. He asked this guy if he'd like to join the Muram Alliance. He said that with his help Yunho will be able to spread his wings behind his shoulders and do whatever he wants. Yunho thought of this proposal. After all, this old man now seriously wants to invite the guy to the best Miran faction. The man at the next table saw the old man and immediately recognized him. After all, he was an elder from the beggars sect. These guys who were sitting at the next table told Yunho that the guy had a good day today because whoever interested the elder would become great warriors in the Miram Alliance. Yunho smiled and looked at the old man again. He understood that he was now in control of the situation and could make any decision. He crossed his arms over his chest, struck a closed pose, and said he refused this offer. Guango was shocked by this response. After all, no one had ever turned him down before, and this offer was unique and many people dream of it. Guan said he was embarrassed to hear such a quick refusal, but the guy replied that he didn't see any embarrassment in that old man. Guan was very dissatisfied with the answer and really wanted to know why the guy had turned down the opportunity. Yunho replied that he doesn't need a reason to refuse any offer, but the guy understood that he needed to satisfy this old man's curiosity, at least a little, and said that the reason could be that he simply wasn't interested. Guan said that if the boys weren't interested in such a proposal, he wouldn't raise the subject any further, but would ask the boy to behave carefully in future. Guan told the guy that he assumed the boy would soon be in great danger, and Yunho took that as a threat. Guan smiled and looked at the guy. He understood that he had great power and connections, and the guy's answer really upset him. The barbarian king Pingjio of the Ping family, who lives in Hab, is one of the 24 strongest martial artists, and everyone knows that when he's angry, he takes his opponents to the extreme. And above all in life, he values his son, whose ankle Yunho recently broke. Guan told the guy all this and asked him to remember these words, because they couldn't help him in the future. The old man said that the head of the Ping family would not tolerate this and would take revenge on the Supreme Coalition for this act because his honor had been insulted. Yunho finally understood who this scoundrel's father was, and now it became clear to him why he behaved so disgustingly in society. Guan asked the guy what he thinks now about the whole situation and whether he has changed his decision to join the alliance. Guan said that he knows the feeling the guy is experiencing right now and knows that the boy doesn't want to get involved with such a crazy person, but he can ask the head of the Peaceful Alliance to resolve this situation for Yunho's sake. Guan said he would only do this if the guy showed interest in joining the Miramalian. Somi began to worrying at this point and to feel strange. She was afraid for her brother and wanted to ask him to make the right decision. Yunho replied to this old man that because of his threats and conversations his sister is now sitting in fear, and he doesn't like it. Yunho told this old man that if he has nothing more to tell him, then he will ask him to leave the table and let them eat in peace with his sister. Guan was shocked by the answer and got very angry with the guy. He didn't understand why the boy behaved so arrogantly and allowed himself to communicate with him like that. He left the company and started walking, but in the end he said that they would meet again. Soy asked her brother if it was normal for you to send this person away, but Yunho asked his sister not to worry about it. He said that nothing bad would happen and that his intimidation was unreliable. Guan felt humiliated and insulted after his proposal was rejected by this brat. He thought that this child was behaving very arrogantly and impolitely towards the elder, and such behavior was unacceptable. He was surprised that the boy didn't even flinch when he heard he was in danger. He clenched his teeth in anger and began to think that the new generation was behaving disgustingly. This guy had total self-confidence and not a drop of braggadocio. It infuriated him because this man behaved perfectly, and the old man felt weak when he communicated with him. In a large gray room near a high staircase, there are 2 guards with spear torches hanging on the walls, and in the center of the room, there are stone cubes with torches inside. A man in expensive yellow-orange clothes entered the dungeon, and a guard followed him. He approached the cell where his nephew was sitting and said that he was very angry with the guy, and he warned him to think before he did anything and not to open his mouth in private company. The guy himself wasn't visible because it was dark in the cell, but his voice could be heard. He asked his uncle to get him out of here. You asked the head of security if it was really necessary to lock up your nephew in a cell for a fight between young people, and the head of security replied that he was punished according to family rules. You said that the head of the Ping family will not wait quietly when he hears about this situation. The guy replied that in an Aming family home, no one can be above the family rules. This answer irritated the gentleman. He hadn't expected them to really take an ordinary fight so seriously. You came to your palace to inform this guy's father that he was now sitting in a prison cell. His father was furious at the news he heard and couldn't believe it. That this idiot was put behind bars because of a fight that took place in the palace. You said that the representative of the law was very stubborn when he tried to ask him to release the guy. Father was very angry about this and grabbed the silver cup in his hand and broke it. He said these idiots dared to hit the young master of the Ping family. He called Ping Deja, and this man immediately came to the throne room and asked what the head of the family demanded of him. He sent this man to the Union and only came back when he broke both of his legs for hitting his son. They were shocked by such an order from the head of the family that had just crippled the son of the leader of the Supreme Coalition. You tried to rectify the situation and explained in the family's mind that the Supreme Coalition has been cooperating with your family for many generations. If the situation gets even worse, your cooperation will come to an end, he said. The silver cup on the floor and kicked. This he rose from his throne and said that he would not take a calm view of the situation in which his son was humiliated and locked behind bars. He said that if these wimps are afraid to fight this guy and defend the honor of this family, then the gentleman himself will break this guy's legs and arms and rip the man's head off in At that moment, he realized that his honor would be profaned if he didn't complete this task, so he knelt down and asked the Lord to allow him to complete this task, and he was ready to go there. Mr. Pang looked at this guy with his furious eyes and thought, is it worth sending this guy there, or is it better to do it all alone? They walked through the corridors of the great palace and talked to each other. They went to the window, and the gentleman told this man that he didn't know why the boss cared so much about this child. He said he would take responsibility for any consequences, then asked the man to be careful. The man said he would do it tonight. He would try to be very quiet and do everything so that no one would notice and not know what they were doing. Night fell, and only half of the moon was visible. Clouds floated in the sky and covered the stars. At night, the city lights begin to burn, and the city itself becomes like a lair of fireflies. A girl approached Yunho and asked if he was the young master of the Supreme Coalition. This girl reported that. The leader asked him to give him a message. He said that the young master could go to the annex first because they would talk until late at night. Somi closed her eyes and said that everything has been going on for a long time, and it's probably because they rarely get together. Yunho acted completely indifferent to this situation and said that he and his sister could leave now because he was sick and tired of all the stares from that beggar sect elder. The girl kindly offered her help and said she could take them to the guest house and asked them to follow her. A man appeared on the roof of the house. He moved very quietly on the roof and went unnoticed. The man dressed in black clothes so as not to be seen at night, which made it easier for him to keep an eye on the guy. He watched them from the roof of the house and thought he needed to resolve the conflict between two children. He put a red mask on his face and said that nowadays it's very difficult to earn money for a living. Yunho looked at his sister and said that she should go home first and rest. Soi asked her brother where he decided to go so late, and the guy replied that he needed to go for a walk because he ate too much. She laughed and said that she understood him because he ate non-stop all day, and it would be useful for him to take an evening stroll. Soi asked her brother not to walk for too long and not to stay too long because she was worried about him and didn't want anything to happen to him. Yunho lowered his head and started walking down the street. He opened his eyes and they began to glow blue. He thought there was an unwanted guest in the guest house and wondered what kind of brave man decided to do this. Only he began to walk through the lip of the courtyard near the guest house. Yunho sensed the presence of a stranger here, but so far has not been able to see him. He looked around and realized that the enemy was nowhere to be seen, which meant that he was hiding very well. He wondered where this stranger was now, and the game of hide and seek aroused a special interest in him. Yunho decided to ask this guy out loud how long he would wait for the right moment, and the assassin was very surprised to find out. Yunho said that if this killer followed him to such a remote and isolated place, then he should show himself politely to save the guy the trouble. The assassin tried to hide and disappear so that the guy wouldn't discover him. He thought he was moving too stealthily and using the great law of invisibility technique, but this guy still noticed him. Yunho said that even standing on the ground, he can feel his panicked breathing that someone murderous is trying to hide. The assassin thought this guy was mocking him and trying to trick him. He uses his tricks to make the assassin appear. He can't determine his location, but he senses his presence. Yunho asked why you are still in doubt as to whether he really means that he had no other intentions. Yunho said that if this killer hasn't shown up yet, that means he has no courage. The assassin at that moment began to feel strange. He understood that this guy was provoking his emotions. This boy managed to make the killer angry and hurt his feelings. He thought that this mission was not intended to be a fair fight, but as he is an elder of a well-known faction, he cannot tolerate such an attitude towards himself. The assassin jumped off the roof and thought he had to fight this guy face to face and stopped short of going too far. He wanted to attack from above and knock this guy out immediately. He tried to use his strongest and fastest blow, so the guy couldn't move for long. Yunho stayed in his place and didn't move to the side. It seems that the guy doesn't feel threatened at all. But suddenly he turned his head to the killer and smiled and told him that this killer had wasted his martial arts. Yunho immediately decided to kick his opponent and not let him attack. First, this blow was very powerful and caused the assassin an enormous amount of damage, and the assassin managed to defend himself against this blow at the last moment. After this assassin received a blow, he flew to the side and hit a wall. Yunho asked this pathetic murderer and what he was thinking about showing his intention to kill the guy while attacking him from behind. Yunho assumed that it was the murderer who treated the boy like dog shit, and that offended him. The assassin was green because he had just been shot. He looked at this guy and said, "This kid is very arrogant." He decided to attack this boy and show him all his power. He made the assassin move very quickly to the guy and touched his chest with his palms. The assassin made a strong burst of energy with his palms and an explosion occurred that threw back. Yunho started to fly backwards but managed to keep his feet on the ground and didn't fall. He moved very quickly and suddenly appeared in front of the assassin's face. Yunho began to laugh loudly and asked this killer if that was all he could do. The assassin jumped back and felt that his opponent had protective chi energy. He couldn't believe that such a young guy could have such a strong protective energy. Yunho said that it was all thanks to his good teacher, who taught him the best martial arts techniques. The guy asked this killer to tell his head that next time they would send someone stronger to him if they didn't want to stop there. He tried to explain his demands to this murderer more clearly and said that next time he wanted to fight the father of that scoundrel he had already humiliated in the morning. The assassin was furious with this guy's behavior. He said that the son usually has no right to ransom for saying such words. But Yunho wasn't going to listen to this weakling's pitiful moans and immediately hit him in the chest. The assassin flew to the side and hit the wall in the same place where he fell before. There was a bright blue color on his chest and he felt great pain. Yunho hit him with the palm of his hand, and this time he used a lot more force when he struck. He stood up and looked at the defeated enemy. He was wondering if this weakling would be able to get up and continue the battle, or would he just lie on the ground and squirm in pain. Yunho heard that another person had appeared in this area. He started coughing to get their attention, and the boy turned his head towards this person. The old man ran towards the boy and was delighted with what he had just seen. He said that he had come here by chance and ended up at an incredible show. He asked the boy if he had been injured during the battle with this killer. Yunho realized that that old man was watching them and felt disgusted that this would happen again and would get in the way. Yunho said that he didn't notice this old man right away and thought it was just a rat running around, at first yelling at the guy for talking nonsense. Guan turned his head to the side and saw the face of a man lying near the wall. He approached him and asked who this man was. He noticed that this guy looked a bit old, but when he managed to look at the man's face he was shocked. He recognized. He was Ping Diju, and Guan couldn't accept what this man was doing here and why he was hunting him down. Yunho asked the old man how he knew this man, and the old man said that this was the leader of the strongest detachment of the Ping family. This gentleman was the leader of the Ping court detachment. Yunho said that everything was clear to him, and there was nothing interesting here, but the old man was shocked by such an answer, and he didn't understand why this guy was behaving like this. Guan said that the incident should not be taken so lightly because it is a very serious situation. The old man said that the leader of the Ping Joel family has sent the strongest warrior he has to the boy's head, and this means that the leader of the family won't want to stay behind the boy and will continue to pursue him. Yunho said that in the morning this old man said the same thing to him, and there's nothing interesting here. The old man was surprised as always by this guy's response and said that in the morning he had his own interests and he embellished and exaggerated the whole situation. Guan said that the person would want to come in person after discovering that Ping Diju couldn't handle the task. Yunho looked away because he was absolutely not interested in everything that crazy old man was saying. The guy started to leave. I said that if the old man is going to talk about joining the alliance again, then he'll leave immediately. The old man said that this time it's all very serious. He shouted to the guy that the head of the Ping family would personally decide to take care of this matter, and then the Supreme Coalition wouldn't be able to protect him. Yunho is tired of listening to this insufferable nonsense that this crazy old man is talking, and he just plugged his ears with his fingers. He said that this old man is very noisy, and if he carries on like this, he'll have to kill him. Guan began to get even angrier with this boy because he was absolutely unconcerned about the danger that could befall him. But suddenly the old man realized that this child had surpassed all his expectations and turned out to be much more interesting than he could have imagined. And suddenly he realized that it wasn't this guy who would have problems and difficulties. On the contrary, they had crossed his path and now trouble awaited the Ping family. Guan went over to the wounded man and tried to help him, asking if he was all right and how he was feeling. Half the moon was still hanging in the center of the sky and illuminating the earth. Evening. Ping Diju went to the palace after losing a fight to this child. The soldier informed the lord that he had found this guy unconscious near the entrance to his residence, and they carried him with the rest of the soldiers to the palace. The soldier told the gentleman that this man had no serious injuries, but was now unconscious. You were green and understood the current situation, that everything was out of control, and this guy needed to be dealt with once and for all. The morning came. It was a beautiful sunny day. Clouds floated in the sky, and the air was very fresh. Loud and strange noises were heard in the palace. The man's hand began to reach out with a very fast movement and tried to grab something. The leader of the Ping family grabbed the throat of a man who couldn't do the job with his hand. He was very angry and wanted to know in detail what happened last night and why this person was coming and being dragged here unconscious. He held the man by the neck in the air with one hand and asked him to explain how he would come back dishonored when he had to break that brat. Diju Leg said that this boy was able to notice him through the law of invisibility and could even use the energy barrier chi. The leader threw the man aside and his back hit the wall. The leader didn't want to hear anything and told the idiot to shut up. He said that this idiot was just using useless tricks to get close to the guy, and after he failed and was beaten up, he decided to go back to the palace with excuses. The leader said that he personally wanted to see this puppy and asked his assistant where this child was now, but his assistant replied that this was impossible. He said that he had just received a message informing him that the leader of the Miram Alliance would be arriving here. You were very angry about the whole situation and understood that you shouldn't meet this boy now, but you were ready to tear him apart with your bare hands and do it as soon as possible. The late master's funeral was still taking place in the palace, and a red candle was constantly burning near his portrait. The asterisk came with a portrait with very long gray hair tied up in a bun with a golden hairpin. This man pulled his hands forward and joined them, after which he lowered his head and bowed carefully to the dead master. He kept his eyes closed for a long time and didn't move. Apparently, he was communicating with the dead master in his head. Elite warriors with white bandanas lined up and waited for their master. They stood face to face and created a corridor from their bodies to the owners. The same old man with long gray hair came out of the great hall where the dead master was located. It was clear on his face that he was worried about something, and this thought didn't allow him to relax. He walked accompanied by the owner of this palace, and the owner asked if this gentleman was already coming back, because everyone thought he would stay here at least until the end of the funeral. The old man said that he couldn't do that because he is the leader of the alliance and has many responsibilities that he must fulfill. He said it would soon be time to mourn his brother as a member of the Namgong family. When the people saw the leader of the alliance walking through the center of the square, they immediately began to bow down to him to greet him. The old man looked at all those people and smiled. He tried to look friendly with them. Yunho was in the middle of a crowd and saw the leader of the alliance walking through the center of the square and white energy emanating from him. He smiled and thought that his master was right about this man. Yunho thought that he had an incredibly high level of chi energy, and that level of energy stuns everyone even with an ordinary smile. The Sword King Namgong Jin would like to fight him for the place of the strongest as in the old days when he was still the king of Yukai. The guy said out loud, "What you want one day to fight this old man and measure your strength against him?" Soy asked her brother what he had just said, but the guy replied that he hadn't said anything special. Suddenly he turned his head to the side and saw a very interesting man. Of all the people in the square, there was one person who interested the guy, a tall man in red clothes. This man was very angry, and I understand that this can be noticed immediately, but Yunho understood the reason for this man's anger. He immediately realized that this same Ping Ji was from the Ping family. Yunho watched this man for a while, and the only thing he thought when he looked at him was that this man looked like a big stupid bear. He smiled and thought that he needed to do the same to this scoundrel he did to his son and publicly humiliate him. Through the wooden bars on the windows you could see the sun's rays entering the room. The leader of the Namgong family asked the gentleman why he had come so far to demand the release of a prisoner. The man said that yesterday he spoke very clearly about this and made it clear that what happens in the family's territory will be controlled by its laws without exception. Pan asked the head of the Namgong family if he really wanted to make him angry. Nong said that according to family law the crime should be made public and the punishment carried out publicly, but he only put them behind bars after identifying them. He said that Mr. Pang makes him very upset when they try to break the law and his family. But this man was beside himself with rage and couldn't stand this kind of behavior towards himself and didn't understand why they were talking to him like an ordinary person. He looked at his diplomats who had been standing on the sidelines all this time and shouted at them, asking why they didn't interfere in this dialogue and help him solve this problem. The man said that he is a representative of the Moan family, and his friend is a representative of the Hang family, and they don't care if this guy is punished according to that family's rules. Mr. Pang was furious at the decision of these useless idiots who didn't support. The owner asked Mr. Pang to behave properly and said that there are things that should not be said or done out loud. He reproached Mr. Pang for being too proud to apologize for his words. A man suddenly appeared and scolded Mr. Pang for being too proud to apologize for his words. It was Somi and Yunho's father. He said that the heir of the Pan family molested his daughter, and there are still bruises on his arm. He admitted that he didn't want to fan the flames of scandal, but Mr. Pang had just added fuel to the fire that he himself had lit with his son. The big man was shocked by this merchant's behavior, and I don't understand what right he has to talk to him like that. He asked him not to treat him like a merchant and to stop underestimating him, otherwise he will be forced to show what the wealth of the Supreme Coalition is capable of paying. He was in a difficult situation and didn't understand how to get out of it like a winner. He didn't want to apologize, and from a moral point of view, he was already a loser. But Som's father was very offended by the actions of these people and was ready to go all the way in the confrontation between their families. Yunho stood in the square and looked at the leader of the and his teacher brother. He said that this man definitely knows how to fight. Soy said that they still want them better than all those warriors. A thug suddenly ran out of the building and broke down the door. It was an angry Mr. Ping. When the big man found himself on the street, the first thing he saw in front of his eyes was the same guy who beat up his son and started destroying his reputation. He looked at him with contempt and didn't care what he should do in this situation. Apparently, there was no limit to the emotions of anger consuming his mind. Yunho hid his sister behind his back so that she would be protected and watched this gentleman attentively and waited for his actions. Pan was standing on a hill at that moment, and it seemed that he had become even bigger and more terrifying than before. He was a very stupid man, but he needed a lot of time to make the right decision. He went downstairs and started walking towards this guy, but he decided to pass and told the boy that he should be grateful to Mr. Pen for not twisting his head. After the big man said that, he walked past and moved on, trying to calm down. Yunho smiled and realized that he would not tolerate such an attitude towards him, and Thug himself had made his choice when he threatened him. Then Yunho shouted at the big man that he looked like a big cowardly bear. Mr. Ping heard this insult and just shouted at the guy and stopped. He turned his head towards the boy and asked him to repeat the words he had just said. Yunho asked his little sister to be sent as far away from here as possible because it's going to be hot here now and she could get hurt. Yunho said he doesn't like to repeat things twice, and Mr. Ping apparently has hearing problems if he couldn't hear the first time. Yunho said that especially for him, he would repeat those words again and called Mr. Pan a big cowardly bear. Mr. Pang at that moment was as angry as possible with this boy, and his nose flew and he looked like a boiling kettle. The palace owner walked with his guest and the leader of the Supreme Coalition through the palace grounds and discussed the conflict. Occurred. The head of the Naming family apologized to the leader of the Supreme Coalition for the situation and said that he should have taken the matter more seriously. The leader of the Supreme Coalition said that his friend acted very wisely in this situation and stood by him. That's a big part of it for him. Mr. Nam Gong smiled and said that this incident had deeply hurt the feelings of everyone here and said that in any case the situation was on this gentleman's side. Suddenly he saw his daughter standing alone near the palace and looking away. Somi saw her father and thought she had to tell him everything. Father asked her daughter why she's here alone and where her brother is. Somi came closer to tell her father everything. His name was Guan. He was a monster who couldn't resist fighting because of the excessive energy that came over him. The white fox stayed with him for several days and then hit him because he kept threatening and pestering him with his fights, after which that rude idiot immediately became polite and didn't do it again. Yunho thought that he was now in a human body, but the situations that happened to him are very similar to those that happened in a past life. When he looked at this guy, he remembered that bear. He was interested in how many blows this big guy would become obedient to. He thought it made sense to use the sword immediately and not waste time, but that would probably be too easy. Mr. Pang looked at this guy and said that he was acting too confidently since he decided to defy the master, and his arrogance reached the heavens. Even the name of the Supreme Coalition is nothing compared to him. Yunho started laughing loudly and couldn't stop laughing. He's very surprised that someone as stupid as Pingjol knows how high the sky is. The guy said that the heavens hate arrogant idiots who talk all kinds of crap about them, and said that the Lord in the ping of the heavens will surely strike with lightning. This big guy gets angry at night when I hear the sarcastic response of his opponents to tolerate such an attitude towards himself from some kid. Pon made a splash of his energy, and a wave of energy appeared around him, lifting the grass into the air. Yunho thought that the 24 strongest warriors were believed to be at heaven level, but it seems that everything is a little different from the rumors. He smiled and thought that it would be very annoying if he continued to behave the way he was now. Han said he first wanted to break this guy's legs to satisfy his anger, but now he understands that this won't be enough. Yunho told his opponent if he had already beat his fangs, then it's time for him to jump in and bite, and asked why waste time with unnecessary conversations. He couldn't help himself and once again called his opponent a big, stupid, cowardly bear. Pan exploded with rage. He couldn't believe that this idiot was still talking to him without respect. Ping started running towards his opponent, moving his legs quickly and taking long strides. He raised his hand and wanted to hit him with his strong fist. Yunho saw the tattoo that his opponent wanted to make on him and laughed. He thought that this was a very obvious attack and that a martial artist like him could come up with something more interesting. The guy managed to easily dodge the blow and threw himself to the side. He walked behind his opponent and stopped in place. The big man continued attacking the invisible enemy. He turned his head back and saw that his Brock was already behind him. He told this guy that he moved very well for an inexperienced brat. He decided to attack his enemy again and tried to intimidate him with his great size. Han felt his fist touch the boy's body and thought he might hurt him. But after a few seconds, it was clear that the guy had blocked the blow with his palm and wasn't going to let himself get hurt. They froze in this position and didn't continue the fight because they needed to understand what would happen next. Yunho decided to mock his opponent and said that he was talented from birth and had a good teacher, unlike Mr. Pang. But the big man started to get angry with the boy when he heard him teasing him and wanted to make another attack. Pon waved his hand and decided to attack this guy one more time. But Yunho, as always, managed to dodge the blow in time and jumped high into the air, freezing. Han, I'm going to shout that this guy won't be able to get away from him and he'll leave here today with broken bones. He started running towards the guy to give him another crushing blow. Yunho said that Mr. Pan moves very slowly, and when he waits for the attack, he can already sleep. The big man jumped up and wanted to attack from above and crush this cheeky brat. He hit the ground with his hands, and the ground began to break up into a pile of cracks. He raised his hands and started examining the surface of the earth to see where the guy was. Yunho, at that moment, I was behind him and wiping the dirt and dust off my clothes. He said he was getting tubo. He said he couldn't believe that this man's name was on the list of the 20 for strongest martial artists and had heard that everyone on this list is superior to other masters and has reached the pinnacle of martial arts. Yunho said that Mr. Ping clearly doesn't deserve to be on this list. Those words hurt the great man's pride and feelings, and he didn't understand how he could defeat this guy. He began to remember how the Supreme Elders were thinking about whether or not to add 3 new kings to this list because they hadn't reached their peak yet. One of the elders said that the rest of the members of this list have already reached their peak in martial arts, but there are 3 kings who aren't worthy of being on this list they've created. The idea of renaming the list of the 20 for strongest martial artists to the list of 21 people. Pon heard these elders talking and was furious because they didn't want to put him on the list. He told Yunho that all this is a waste of youth and a precious life on unnecessary things. The guy looked at this big guy in surprise and decided to try to listen to the boring story he now wanted to tell. But Pan told the guy that during this whole fight, he was holding back his powers and didn't want to show them in full force, but now this guy has pissed him off and he'll have to do it. Han began to accumulate orange energy in his body and released it to enter the battle. He said he'd be happy to help this guy die if he wanted to. Yunho began to smile and said that he was finally waiting for a normal opponent to fight him because before that he was very bored. Pon tried to accumulate a huge amount of energy in his palms to throw it away later. He used a fighting technique called paling to start shooting energy from his palms. He released spheres of energy from his hands that flew very quickly towards his opponent and didn't explode when they collided with an object. He kept throwing these spare parts out of his hands, and everything around him turned into a battlefield where everything exploded. Holes began to appear in the earth, and the earth itself flew into the air, along with the grass. He tried to release all his anger and energy through these energy spheres. He got excited and wanted to destroy everything related to this guy. There was a very loud explosion in the forest that could be seen from afar. Han stopped and decided to see what was happening to his enemy. Now he waited until the smoke cleared, and he could see. He thought that the martial arts in the 7 pens originated on the battlefield. They carry the mural of wartime from birth and contain the will of death to kill enemies on the battlefield. When the smoke cleared, there was a big hole in front of him, and there was nothing else there. The guy disappeared somewhere. Han thought about the fact that he had killed this guy and felt calmer. He said that he wouldn't have done it if this brat hadn't been so arrogant. But a light appeared in the smoke. It was a blue light that moved constantly in space. Han didn't understand where this blue light was coming from, and when the smoke began to dissipate, he saw the silhouette of a guy. Yunho held the sword in his hand, with his arms outstretched, and stood calmly without moving. He was shocked that this guy was still alive and still able to fight. He didn't understand how this was impossible, because it was impossible for such a child to survive after the palm of heaven and earth. Yunho drew his sword forward, and it began to glow with a bright blue light, emitting an enormous amount of energy. He didn't understand how this guy managed to reveal the aura of the sword at such an old age and achieve unity with his weapon. Yunho stood in front of his opponent right in the center of the forest glade and held his sword in his hands. Han didn't understand why this boy hadn't been hit by a single attack and assumed that the guy had repelled all these attacks using his world. He remembered how the man who was supposed to kill this boy talked about his incredible strength and how he uses the chi energy barrier. He started to get even angrier because he hadn't listened to this guy back then, and now he saw with his own eyes Yunho's strength. Only now did he realize that the words spoken by the assassin who came from the mission were true and were not excuses. Han realized that this was a guy who was trying to beat him like that and using Mormic because it was impossible to defend against these attacks in any other way. He couldn't understand how the old man managed to train this guy to such incredible results at such a young age. He told this guy that he was a very clever boy because he was able to hide his martial arts skills under arrogance. Yunho smiled and started laughing because he understood that this idiot had fallen into a trap. Yunho said yes, and she was unexpectedly good, and he even had to draw his sword to fight her off. He said that it would be very stupid to hide this sword back in the knife that later. He pulled the guy into a fighting stance and began to prepare for battle. He said that now it's his turn to attack, and he wants to show what's coming in return. Han thought that this boy was really strong, but even so, he's still a child, and that's his weak side. He activated his energy, and his hands and eyes began to glow orange. Yunho knew that the heaven-destroying sword was based on 3 different techniques and was keen to try them out in action. He understood that in the outside world, for the first time, he would be able to demonstrate his magnificent martial arts technique. He remembered the moment when he sat with his old teacher on the edge of a cliff and talked about his first sword. They dipped their feet in the water, and the old man said that this sword was created by him and is very laconic and silent. It would be good if I didn't give him a name, but I should have agreed with him. Yunho didn't want to do that, and the old man said that if he didn't do it, he would end his martial arts training. He knew that this sword was the most expensive item for his dead master. Yunho said that this is a sword that can crush the heavens, and now he's going to show it off in full force. Ping said he had never heard of such a martial art in his life and wasn't afraid of it. He started throwing orange energy spheres with his hands to break through the guy's defense. Yunho remained motionless in his seat, preparing to repel these spheres. He activated the aura of this sword and used a technique called wind strike. Yunho quickly began to move through space and maneuver between the spheres. Han was shocked that this guy was capable of such a thing. Yunho moved very quickly in space and approached his opponent. He was able to bypass all these spheres and remain unharmed. Energy spheres began to explode and fireworks occurred again in the forest. Yunho touched his opponent's neck with his blade, cut his hair into braids, and struck his blow. Han didn't understand how he had managed not to notice this guy because at the last moment his body was seized by cold horror. Han understood that none of the 24 strongest warriors had received such a quick and powerful blow from this guy that he wondered if a sword like this had ever existed before. Ping looked into this guy's eyes and thought that this child's martial arts had reached their peak. The grass flew up into the air and slowly began to fall down. Yunho sheathed his sword because he no longer needed it. He stood next to the fallen enemy and said that he did most of the work for him because this big guy is the second person on Earth who has seen this incredible technique. Pan asked this brat why he stopped and decided not to kill him. Yunho spread his hands to his sides and said to his master that he had asked him not to take a life without good reason, so he couldn't kill this gentleman, no matter how much he was killed. He added to his words that this person is not as bad as he may seem, and the most important thing is that he will not. Pan started to get angry and asked the guy to kill him because he would live in shame after forgiving such an arrogant child. This is terrible, and said that he wants to die. Yunho looked at this man carefully and decided to ask him again how well he thought about it. Yunho told this gentleman that he had no idea how painful it was to die, and didn't understand why he was so persistent in covering up for his worthless son after he had molested his sister. Yunho said that if he had apologized to his son in time, it wouldn't have gone so far. That's all. His fault, because he's a stubborn bear. The guy couldn't let this idiot leave the battlefield in such a state that he punched him in the cheek. Big Bear was defeated by an arrogant little fox and flew away after taking damage. Pan sat on the floor and coughed up blood. He felt that his life had just been destroyed and his face was very swollen. Yunho said he did it for his sister Somi. At that moment a white smoke began to appear around them, turning into mist. Yunho said that this gentleman treated his father like a low-class man, refused to accept his good intentions, and even tarnished the name of the Supreme Coalition. He ordered this big guy to get out of here and told him to think about why the guy left him alive even after such actions. Dad got very angry when he saw his son. He scolded the guy for letting his sister walk alone around the palace grounds and said that the boy had broken his rules and asked where he had been all this time. Yunho was very surprised when his father came to him to find out where he was, and his sister said that her brother had left because his stomach was hurting. The father asked his son if everything was okay with him now, and the guy replied that his belly had stopped hurting and everything was fine. He felt that his son was lying to him, but he didn't know how to get him to drinking water, so he just looked at him in disbelief. Yunho widened his eyes as much as possible and looked at his father, showing calm and confidence in his words. The head of security approached the Lord and informed him that the carriage was ready to leave. It was time for them to go. Somi asked his brother if everything was all right with him and how his duel with the big man went. He smiled and showed with all his appearance that everything had turned out even better than he thought, and told his sister that everything was fine. The candle near the portrait of the dead master gradually begins to burn out. The head of security at the palace informed the leader of the family that the headache disappeared immediately after leaving the message. Pan said in his message that he accepts all his son's crimes and agrees that he should be punished according to the law and the rules of this family. The leader didn't understand why he made such a decision, because it's very surprising for a person with such a temperament. He assumed that this gentleman came to the corner. He had no other choice. The second man suggested that something else might have influenced this gentleman and made him change his mind. He said that according to the guard at the gate, he had sought out Chief Peng and the young master of the Supreme Coalition by going into the forest. After which the guard informed him that half an hour later, the young master was the first to return, and Boss Peng came back when the Supreme Coalition left the gates of this palace. He said that the young master seemed fine after returning, while the head of the Peng family came back afterwards. The vicious battle, and he was covered in cuts and bruises. The man said that this information is unreliable because no one saw them except the guard at the gate, but even so, this is one of the versions. He said that, if you can believe this guard's words, then the young master of the Supreme Coalition has managed to pacify the head of the Peng family, and so he has decided to give in. The gentleman raised his eyebrows and didn't understand how to react to this information because it all seemed like a kind of fiction. He said that a real monster had appeared in the Supreme Coalition. An old man appeared in his memories who constantly gave him instructions and tips, and this old man turned to the head of the family. He asked never to provoke the monster of the Supreme Coalition because this guy is stronger than anyone he's ever seen. He only now began to understand what kind of monster the old man was constantly telling him about and why he asked him not to provoke him. His uncle always told him about world events with his metaphors and exaggerations. But then, he thought that his uncle was telling him about the monster and was referring to the enormous financial power of the Supreme Coalition. But only now did he begin to understand what was really going on and what kind of monster the old man was telling him about. When they met, he immediately felt something very strange. The eyes of this child were not like the eyes of a youngster. They were completely different. He thought that if the guard's words were true, this child really had defeated the head of the PN family, so the monster his uncle had mentioned was much more terrible than it might seem at first glance. He has realized that this monster is the same child who has been taught by his uncle all this time, so he knows this boy's abilities. On this day, the weather was magnificent again. There were lots of apples in the sky. The guy threw the dice up in the air, and each dice was a different color. The dice fell on the red board and showed certain symbols. This guy was surprised when he saw the result on the dice. He couldn't believe his eyes. What he saw seemed like a real horror to him because all these bones showed the same result. The boy said that there was a high probability that he would fall on his back and break his nose or cut his hand with a piece of silk. He approached a tree branch and a green leaf fell from the branch. He put this sheet on his chin and started talking to Amit. He asked him to carry this sheet through the air and for this sheet to take away all the problems of today. He let go of this air of foliage and began to fly. But suddenly this leaf froze in the air and began to float in place. The guy saw that this leaf was flying very slowly and came back to him. A green leaf landed on the guy's black hair. He was upset because this leaf didn't want to take all his problems with him, and the guy said it wasn't his today. There were many people in the city, and everyone was busy with their own affairs. The city today looked like one big ring. The guy held a gold earring in his hand and looked at it against the sky. Yunho tried to look at this trophy in the best possible light and understand why people in this world put them in their ears. He said he should have cut that idiot's ear off, but for some reason he doubted it. He thought that if he were Yukai at that moment, he wouldn't even think about it and would certainly cut off his ear. But if it really was a united kingdom, then the ear wouldn't be enough, it would tear it in half. He couldn't believe that he had actually spared him. After all, it wasn't like him, and he realized that he had really become a man. The Vice Lord heard this guy's monologue and asked what he was talking about now, but the guy said he didn't say anything important. Yunho threw the Vice Lord a gold earring he had taken from Mr. Pan and said that the Vice Lord could sell it and pay for his mother's treatment. The Viceroy tried to take this earring and not miss the young master's very generous opportunity to make some easy money. He told the Vice Lord that this was a gold earring that was in the ear of the head of the Ping family, and now he doesn't need it. The Deputy Lord screamed in fear that it wouldn't happen, asked the guy how it happened, and he thought the boy was joking. There were a lot of people at the bazaar that day, all of whom decided to try the bazaar to buy new products for themselves or to have a tasty meal. Yunho went to the market specifically to buy something tasty and took several large fried prawns. Since then, he has changed into a human body. He still can't get used to the fact that food in this world can be very tasty. Suddenly, he noticed something very strange not far from him. It was a crowd of people, but he didn't understand what was going on. He saw a crowd of people standing near the wall and watching very carefully for some reason, and the boy wondered why these people were watching. The guy put several dice from the game in his hands, otherwise he shook his hand so that the dice got mixed up. He threw these dice and they fell on the game board and shook, showing certain symbols. The guy sat on the pavement and said that he sees that all the money this man has, and also the money he earns, is going to be stolen. The man wasn't prepared to hear such information. He said that he has a brother and wants to invest his money in him so that he can earn even more. The boy asked why this man had come to him and was trying to find out about his dacha if he was so confident in his idea. The man said that he was going to invest a large sum of money in this idea, and so he got a bit nervous and wanted to know about his luck with this guy. The man asked this boy how much money he should pay for his services, and the boy replied that his service costs 100 nangs. The man asked why this guy told him such a big amount, because he tells other people that the amount is 10 coins, and he asked for 100, and the boy replied that it's all the sellers.